this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public is not being told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell, in for Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sadly, she is unwell for another day, so you've got me till 1 o'clock. Thank you so much for your company. There's a lot around today, and there's a lot I'm really angry about, including the Sentencing Council. This is a group of unelected, mainly judges, people from the Crown Prosecution Service and others who've come up with two-tier justice. They are saying that if you're an ethnic minority, if you're transgender, if you're essentially not a white straight male, that your sentence should be at least considered to be lower. If that's not two-tier justice, I don't know what is. We've been told, we've been gaslighted for such a long time, nearly a year now, by those saying there's no two-tier justice in this country. Here it is in black and white. Mike spoke to the Shadow Justice Secretary earlier. In fairness to the Justice Secretary, Shabna Mahmood, she's condemned it. The Sentencing Council is independent, but we're going to be getting into that today. We're going to be talking about Ukraine as well. The whinging 14-year-old who narrated the BBC's Gaza documentary, he says his family has been targeted with some hurty words. What about his dad? Well, he's a Hamas terrorist who thinks it's okay to kill Jewish people simply because they're Jewish. He should buck up. He's also got some money from you, the licence fee payer, £790 into the hands of a family which is involved with Hamas terrorism in Gaza. There's lots to discuss this morning. I want your thoughts as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You know me, I try to get as many people on the air as possible between now and 1 o'clock. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. You can follow me at Peter Cardwell on Twitter. And remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note. We'll play as many of those as we can. Less than a minute, please, for the voice notes. You can also send me a text message via WhatsApp or give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. I'm delighted this morning that Philip Ingram is with me. Great to have you in the studio, Philip. You well?
Good morning. Yeah, very well, very well. And Sassy, we're almost matching.
Almost coordinated.
Both in your accent and shirt.
Well, exactly. Same part of the world as well. Yes, indeed. Well, great to have you. Philip is, of course, a former senior military intelligence officer and commentator on all sorts of things, including the story that I am deeply troubled by. There's a woman called Sue Carr, okay? She is Lady Sue Carr. She's the Lady Chief Justice. Let's have a look at her if you are watching on the screen. We'll put a picture up of her in a second. I am really worried about her. I am really worried about the pernicious influence, I believe, in my strongly held personal belief, the pernicious influence she has on public life in this country. She is the Lady Chief Justice. She's the most senior judge in this country, and that's fair enough and good for her, and she's had an amazing career. But she's saying certain things, she's making certain things clear that I think are pernicious and wrong. First of all, on the 18th of February, what she did was Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer both criticised a judge's ruling on an immigration case. What happened was there was a scheme that was designed for Ukrainians fleeing the war. Badenoch said, a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is what the scheme was designed to do. This was a family, a Gazan family, that were allowed to come over. And she said, this is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong and cannot be allowed to stand. Are the government planning to appeal any points of law, and if so, which one? This was a family of 6, a mother, a father and 4 children, had sought permission to live with a British relative who proved he was able to house and financially support them. This was a Palestinian family given the right to live in the UK under the Ukrainian family scheme. Kemi Badenoch criticised it, leader of the opposition. The Prime Minister criticised it. He said this was not something, that this was not properly what should have been done under the scheme. But Baroness Sue Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, said the remarks were unacceptable and conflicted with the duty of politicians to uphold the rule of law and respect the independent role of judges. Well, let me tell you something. I entirely respect the independence of Sue Carr and other judges. What I don't respect is when they make decisions that are wrong. And we can call them wrong because we have this thing that Sue Carr may not be entirely familiar with, which is called free speech in this country, for the moment. She's done something else as well. She's part of something called the Sentencing Council. There are a number of people on the Sentencing Council, senior judges, justices of the peace, people who are involved with the Ministry of Justice as well. Now, what they've done is that they've decided and put forward different guidelines that say that ethnic and faith minorities are less likely to go to prison. Honestly, this is what is happening today on the 6th of March 2025. All ethnic minorities and transgender people convicted of a crime should be treated differently under measures due to come into force in less than 4 weeks. Now, Robert Jenrick, he is the Shadow Justice Secretary. He brought this to the attention of the Justice Secretary, who I'm going to praise in a minute for doing good work on this, but she didn't seem to know what was going on. This is what Robert Jenrick told Mike about an hour ago in this programme.
I was emailed by a magistrate who, like many others across the country, received an email from the Ministry of Justice, Shabana Mahmood's own department, telling them that this was now the rules that they should be abiding by from the end of the month. So how she didn't know about this, God only knows, but that was the case. We got it into Parliament. Now we've got it, thanks to you and many others, into the living rooms and in the newspapers across the country. We've got to stop this. I don't want to live in a country where you are treated differently depending on whether you're a straight white man or a Hindu woman. This is totally wrong and it has to end.
Robert Jenrick is right. What he is saying is factual. Sue Carr, Baroness Carr, who is the Lady Chief Justice, is saying that by an accident of birth, by something that you cannot control, your ethnicity, your background, that you should be treated differently in the legal system. The point of justice in this country, and I speak as someone who was a special advisor in the Ministry of Justice, the point of justice in this country is that justice is blind. We've seen Lady Justice, we've seen her holding her scales with her blindfold on. It's not about what you look like, it's not about your background, it's about whether you've committed a crime or not. Yes, there can be extenuating circumstances, there can be mitigation, your barrister is there, and everybody has a right to have legal representation, and they should be represented the best way they can. And, you know, we have rows about legal aid all the time. I do think that people have a right to legal representation and should get it. But the point is that Baroness Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, and the Sentencing Council are saying that actually it's not about the law, it's not about what you've done or not done, it's not about whether you're a rapist, a murderer, an armed robber, it's not about that. It's about something you can't control, it's about something you're born with, it's about whether you're an ethnic minority. So if you are a straight white man, for example, you should be treated less favourably, say these guidelines, than people who are transgender, neurodiverse, or from an ethnic minority. That is absolute bunkum. It is anti-British. It is against what I would argue the law should be. And who else is on the Sentencing Council? Well, Stephen Parkinson. He's the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. There is a Justice of the Peace, a magistrate. I promise you, what is this person called? She is called Jo King. She must be Jo King, with this ludicrous, unfair, ridiculous idea. Let's have another look at what Robert Jenrick said this morning.
The sentencing guidelines that we uncovered yesterday are a complete disgrace. They show that if you're a woman, if you're neurodiverse, if you're trans, if you're an ethnic minority, if you're from a minority faith group, presumably anyone who isn't Christian, then you are going to get a different treatment under the law. You are less likely to get a custodial sentence. Frankly, this is blatant bias against Christians and straight white men. And many, many people will be rightly furious at this. Your viewers and listeners were sneered at when they said that there was two-tier justice in this country. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, said that we were conspiracy theorists for saying so. Well, here it is, in black and white, the law of the land, the Sentencing Council issuing guidance to every magistrate in this country, telling them to treat people differently on the colour of their skin or the faith that they abide by. It's wrong and it needs to be stopped.
I'm angry about this, but I want to get it right. I want to know who we're actually criticising here. This is not about Keir Starmer, it's not about two-tier Keir, it's not even about his Justice Secretary Shabnam Mahmood, who was unaware of the new guidance. Why she was unaware, I mean, it's a fairly significant change and she should have been aware of it, and that's a mistake in her team and in her department. However, she said she's going to request the reversal of this, but she can't tell them to do it differently because the Sentencing Council is independent. A Ministry of Justice source said she was incandescent when made aware. Shabnam Mahmood said the Sentencing Council is entirely independent. These guidelines do not represent my views or the views of this government. I will be writing to the Council to register my displeasure and recommend reversing this change to guidance. As someone who is from an ethnic minority background myself, I do not stand for any deferential treatment before the law for anyone of any kind. The law can do good things. The Crown Prosecution Service can do good things. Just look yesterday, Zanzo Zhu, this horrendous, awful rapist, convicted of raping 10 women. There are probably many more, and there's an appeal that's gone out. So the Crown Prosecution Service can work. There was a prosecutor called Sarah Pike, who I saw on the news last night, part of a very important team that prosecutes those horrendous crimes. So it's not as if the system sometimes doesn't work. But it's not working today. It's not working because Baroness Carr, Sue Carr, has got it wrong. She's misunderstood her role. She's not realised what the law is. And I'm saying this to someone who is, you know, the Lady Chief Justice of England and Wales. This is a very, very senior person. She's got a panoply. She's got a Chief Constable. She's got various judges. She's got a Lord Justice. She's got a magistrate. She's even got Stephen Parkinson, who is the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. Yesterday, as I say, his service did very good work in leading to the conviction of this horrendous rapist. But his decision and his consent on this Sentencing Council for these two-tier rules is outrageous. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Philip, am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong, and there's a lot to unpick in what you've said. You know, looking at the Lady Chief Justice turning around and saying that politicians shouldn't criticise the independence of the judiciary. A lot of our laws are set in this country, first of all by Parliament, and then by precedents as they go through the courts. And what the other thing the Lady Chief Justice should be doing is making sure that what her sentencing is doing, what her judiciary is doing, is not straying into politics. And she's allowing this to happen. Now, I think there is potentially a way that the government can deal with this, and Secretary of State for Justice can deal with this, because someone must have written the terms of reference for the Sentencing Council. They don't write their own terms of reference, so someone must have told them what their left and right of arc, the framework of as to how they can operate, their independence, and set that independence. That's the thing to change, and that must come from Parliament, because that will give it the level of power.
I want the judiciary to be independent in this country. Yes. I don't want them looking over their shoulder at politicians, telling them what to do. But how could she not have known, and how could the council members here, there's about 10 or 12 of them, how can they not have known that this was antithetical to the very clear principles of justice in this country? You know, you're sitting there, Philip, you know, if you, God forbid, had committed a crime, you would be looked at differently from someone who committed exactly the same crime who happened to be born black or neurodiverse or had become transgender or whatever. That's mad. That's completely mad.
It's completely mad. We've got so many different prosecution systems in this country that actually that happens in many places. You look at the way the civil prosecutions were brought against the post office postmasters.
Yes.
If that had gone through a criminal test, a lot might not have and have been properly investigated by the police and all the rest of it. So there is a two-tier set of justice around different courts that there are in the country anyway at the moment. But this is even further, and this is into the completely unacceptable levels. And where our laws are being interpreted, our judges have to make sure that whenever they get to the point that they feel as if they are changing what Parliament had meant when it set the laws, our judicial system should turn around and say, we cannot rule on this, and fire it back to Parliament for clarification. Because everything goes through Parliament. It's hugely complex. It takes a long time to debate. There will be holes in the legislation. And we've got very clever lawyers, and it's their job to pick their way through the law. But there has to be a backstop, and this has to be something that the Sentencing Council or the Lord Chief Justice or someone has got responsibility for, to turn around and say, actually, no, this is straying into politics. And therefore, to keep that separation, we have to send this back to Parliament again.
Bill in Romsey says, how is it the Sentencing Committee is allowed to change the law? Well, actually, it's not changing the law. This is guidance to judges. This is the reason Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, knew about this, is because a magistrate made him aware of it, because the magistrate had been sent the information. So this is guidance in terms of what they do. It's not quite the law. Brian says, just imagine if she had said all ethnic minorities and transgender people should get tougher sentences. Very good point, Brian. Stuart says the new justice guidelines are only confirming what is happening with two-tier sentencing. Shabna Mahmood is responsible for not controlling the woke judges thus far and not strong enough for rebuffing the judges. Well, listen, I don't know if she can control the judges, and actually I don't even know if it's the role of the Lord Chancellor to control judges, because they're meant to be independent, but the problem is they've gone far beyond their remit. Do you know what? I'm actually going to praise Shabna Mahmood again. It's not often I sit here and praise a Labour Cabinet Minister. Do you know what else she said yesterday? Justice Secretary Shabna Mahmood. Maybe she's someone in the Labour Cabinet we can actually get behind, because she's criticised this mad Sentencing Council plan by Baroness Carr. She's also said on the Nation's Welfare Bill, she said this yesterday, we know that we have too many of our young people currently out of work, not in education, employment and training. She added, there is a moral case here for making sure that people who can work are able to work, and there's a practical point here as well, because our situation is unsustainable. She seems to speak a bit of sense. Are you sure you're a Labour politician, Shabna? Dave is in London and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Dave, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. I'm sorry, but no. No to the Labour Minister. No to Robert Jenrick as well earlier. I'm sick and tired of people saying, oh, it's disgusting, it's disgraceful. If this were Donald Trump, he would say, when I get in office on the first day, I will abolish the Sentencing Council. So basically, if you work for the Sentencing Council, the day after I get in office, you will lose your jobs, all of you. And that will start to wake these people up. Now, I know we don't have this executive order, but it's time we did, because no one's going to change these laws. We'll have all forgotten about it in 2 weeks' time, and we will just drift back to two-tiered justice. So we need to abolish these blooming people, not give them different guidelines or tell them they're wrong. Just sack the lot of them. All of them.
Well, I do want there to be some judges in this country, Dave. I do want them to have their say. Thank you for your call, Dave. Philip.
Yeah. Well, you're comparing what goes on in the UK and what goes on in the United States is very different. We have to remember that the judicial system in the United States is politicised. The Supreme Court are political appointees, and you tend to find that whenever they make Supreme Court rulings on any judgments that are out there, they tend to fall under party political guidelines.
And I'm not sure I want that either.
We don't want that in this country. We've got the independence of the judiciary. I agree that our judiciary has become exceptionally woke for some reason or other, and this is something where Parliament has got the power to change it, to take that wokery away, to stop criminals being deported because their child doesn't like the chicken nuggets in the country they're going back to, or to stop a child, a paedophile being deported because it might stop him having a family life with his children in this country, which is banned from seeing anyway.
Exactly, you don't want to ruin any children.
This is where our judicial system is broken, and it needs to be given a bit of backbone back.
And my strongly held personal opinion is that Baroness Sue Carr is not the person to fix it. Let us know your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk.
Could have turned that into something like the entire world was actually wanting to expect Meghan to do the right thing and pull her head out of her, you know what, and make amends. And at least with her father, you know, this would have been a great opportunity, a special guest on the season premiere, and she can sit there and make her dad one of those rainbow fruit hats or whatever the things. I mean, it looked like a clown's hat, but you know, Dad would have enjoyed that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Bob in Cheltenham who sent me the following message. The Sentencing Council widening of the need for a pre-sentence report for ethnic minorities and transgender defendants will only further delay the overburdened court system and put additional pressure on the underfunded and overworked probation service, while at best giving the impression of an unfair criminal justice system and at worst creating an imbalance in sentencing that will damage the public opinion of our criminal justice system and potentially create further work for the appeal courts. It is a totally unnecessary change of policy. Defence advocates put forward mitigation on behalf of defendants during sentence when personal circumstances and background are often brought to the attention of sentencing judges. Sentencing guidelines already require personal circumstances to be considered. Great show as always. Sounds as if Bob knows what he's talking about. Let's go to Miranda in Cumbria, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Miranda, great to talk to you. What would you like to say?
Hello, it was just about Sue Carr and the sentencing
yes.
committee. I thought it was pretty scandalous because essentially there are still grooming gangs within certain areas of this country. So when these gentlemen, if they are arrested and put up in court, are there going to be excuses made for their behaviour?
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Miranda. Through this guidance, someone who has been grooming and raping children could say, well, you know, I'm from an ethnic minority, my sentence should be lesser. And that's just not fair, Miranda.
It isn't. It's absolutely despicable. And I do think that she's trying to cover the back of some of the judges who are making these extreme decisions on asylum seekers, and the way that, obviously the gentleman who was a paedophile being allowed to stay in this country.
I don't think any of them are gentlemen, but yes, I know what you mean. You're being very polite, Miranda, which is good.
Yeah, and essentially it is completely woke, and I do think she is being political. I do think a lot of these judges are far more political than they let on to be. Yeah. I mean, I know some judges who go and help with certain charities and have affiliations.
Well, they have a very clear. I think a number of them have a very clear view of the world, Miranda, and they need to be impartial. They need to be, if they want to be independent, and they should be. And as Philip was saying earlier about the American system, I don't want a politicised judicial system. I want an independent, fair, straightforward, honest, impartial justice system. I don't want a political justice system of any stripe. I don't want them to necessarily do things that aren't within the law. And if the law's wrong, well, the law needs to be changed. Michael in Birmingham has given me a ring. Michael, what would you like to say?
I would like to say, forget logic, forget legal arguments. This is straightforward judicial activism and anti-white male racism. There's no other way of putting it. And this is like the long list in line of an agenda of racism against white guys. All you have to do is look at TV programmes, job appointments. White males are discriminated against everywhere.
Well, Michael, I think a lot of people will agree with you on that. I also think that this is very straightforward in that there are all these sorts of arguments. Angela Rayner said that we were paranoid to talk about two-tier justice. If this isn't two-tier justice, I don't know what is.
Me neither. It's absolutely, and I bet you any money, if you watch American TV, this is straight out of the Biden judicial appointments playbook, where I'll bet you if you go into whoever this panel of idiots are, they'll all be woke, they'll all be Labour voters, they'll all be open borders, they'll all be advocates for migrant groups. That's what.
Well, we don't know that, Michael, and we don't know what their individual political opinions are. And there are some people, and actually, what really concerns me, Philip, is that you've got some really senior people here. Lord Justice William Davis, you've got Dr. Elaine Freer, you've got a district judge for the Magistrates Court, Stephen Leake. You've got a chief constable, Rob Nixon, QPM, Queen's Police Medal. You've got Stephen Parkinson, the head of the CPS. Mm-hmm. How do these people not know better?
Well, they should know better, but you get groups of people like that who are in senior positions in their different organisations. They feel as if, in some cases, they're superior, and then you get a strong character that comes in, and they get this groupthink. And we're getting this groupthink that's going through, and they listen to guidance that's coming out from politicians. They listen to guidance that's coming out in the press, and all the rest of things about making things more woke, making things more green, making things more fluffy, and they feel as if they have to bring all of that in. We don't know what guidance is being given into them to look at things from that.
But they've come up with this, and they've got to stand over it.
And then they come up with something and stand over it. So they're getting lots of influences from their different organisations. Look at how woke our police are going at the minute. The amount of money they're wasting on diversity and inclusiveness appointees. It's the same thing across all of these different departments you've mentioned.
And it's completely unfair. And so many aspects of so many stories on this network come down to the very straightforward point. What is fair? What is equitable? What is straightforward? And actually, that's just not the case with this story at all. Let me know your thoughts on it. 0344 499 1000. Russia says it would regard European peacekeepers in Ukraine as officially involved in war. This is Sergei Lavrov, who is the Russian foreign minister. He said that Moscow would regard European peacekeepers deployed to Ukraine as the official involvement of NATO forces in the war against Russia. Several European leaders have floated the idea, obviously, we've heard this, of sending a European peacekeeping contingent to Ukraine after the two sides achieve some sort of ceasefire deal. Philip, this is more your wheelhouse than many other things we discussed this morning. What's your thought on this?
Well, it doesn't surprise me at all. The Russians have been consistent in the message to say that they wouldn't allow European peacekeepers, members of NATO countries, to come in a peacekeeping or peace enforcement operation at all. And this is effectively turning around to Donald Trump's peace plan that he had designed before he got inaugurated and throwing it back in his face. This is possibly a reason why Donald Trump got his team to ambush President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, in the Oval Office last Friday, because Donald Trump has put a peace plan out. He's discussed this with Zelensky for a long time, and Zelensky's come back with his own peace plan. Trump has then gone to Putin with the plan, and Putin has said, "No, I'm not going to negotiate. I want more. I want this. I want that. I'm not going to accept peacekeepers on the ground." And has effectively thrown it back into Donald Trump's face. Trump doesn't want to lose face to his own domestic electorate by failing to get a peace plan for Ukraine. So he rounds on Zelensky to use him and try and blame him for it all falling apart. There's a logic to that in where it sits, but this is just the Russians pouring more fuel on that fire. They found fractures in everything that's going on because Trump is cracking eggs very hard and putting big fissures around the place. The Russians are past masters at weaving their way into those fissures and just wiggling themselves to get it a bit bigger and a bit bigger and a bit bigger. This is what Lavrov's doing.
Thank you, Philip Ingram, MBE. He's a former senior military intelligence officer. He's with me right through until 1 o'clock. And another person who served his country is Sir Ian Duncan-Smith MP. He's the former leader of the Conservative Party. He'll be with me next on this breaking line from Sergei Lavrov, and also the ludicrous story about two-tier justice in this country. It's plain and simple. Let me know your thoughts as well. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Dave has been in touch and says absolutely disgraceful about the two-tier laws. Obviously, judges that oppose this, otherwise the letter would have been sent out to the Shadow Justice Secretary. Yes, there's a magistrate who sent that to Robert Jenrick there. And Leslie says, should the text not need to be approved by the government before the guidelines are sent to judges? Well, no, because the Sentencing Council is independent, and I do want an independent judiciary in this country. I want them to make decisions based on the law, but not based on crazy inequality, and that's what it is. It is inequality. Well, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith MP is the former Conservative Party leader. Good morning, Sir Ian.
Good morning.
I want to talk to you about two-tier justice, but beforehand I wonder if I could ask you to react to what Sergei Lavrov has said, the Russian foreign minister, who said it would regard European peacekeepers in Ukraine as officially involved in the war. If NATO forces were to be peacekeepers, they would be seen as enemy combatants. What do you make of that line from the Russian foreign minister, Sir Ian?
Well, it's not a surprise on two counts. First of all, if you recall, after President Trump decided to go it alone on this and said that there was going to be a peace agreement and he was going to do it with the Russian president, they had a meeting in Saudi Arabia And at that meeting where the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was, Lavrov said categorically that he would consider that any involvement by Western NATO nations in any quote-unquote peacekeeping force he would consider would be an absolute red line in any agreement, and indicated that they would consider that to be part of the fight. So this is not a surprise. He's doubling down on it. They don't want Western European nations involved as part of NATO. And what they're going to say to Trump categorically is this is a treaty breaker, and they're very good at doing this. The KGB, what they do is they just wait for you to make a commitment, and then in negotiations they wait to the last moment, and then they go, oh yeah, no, but we just got one other thing. And they know that time is on their side in that regard, and they know that Trump is in a hurry. So these sort of demands will become very clear, and they will be officially deal breakers. And at that point, if Trump wants to get the deal no matter what, then there's every chance he'll start giving way on these issues, and there will be no peacekeepers on the ground. That's the big threat.
What do you make of the pressure the Ukrainians, and particularly Vladimir Zelensky, are under because of the lack of cooperation from the Americans in regard to specifically intelligence, which has been a development in the last 24, 48 hours?
Well, I just think this is now becoming a punishment beating aimed at Ukraine, and particularly Zelensky. I can understand and agree that we want peace there. We don't want to carry on this war. It's brutal. I've been out to the front line on a number of occasions. I've seen firsthand the devastation. I've seen children's hospitals hit by ballistic missiles. It's absolutely awful, and Russia's behavior has been nothing short of criminal, frankly, through this. But we want peace. So I can understand Trump saying he doesn't want to be committed any longer. We want to get a peace deal. But I thought the treatment of Zelensky in the room, he may not have played it particularly perfectly, but the shouting is unacceptable. But the second thing is switching off intelligence basically means the Ukrainians are going to be incapable of using any of their missiles to target. They'll be able to use other things and drones to target other sort of shorter range missiles, but not the longer range missiles that are necessary to get to the assembly areas where they pull all their quick kit together, the Russians, before sending it to the front. So these things are really tactically disastrous for them. And I had hoped that it was Zelensky says he's ready to engage with a peace deal, Trump would lift that block on arms equipment and intelligence sharing, but it's pretty dangerous right now for the Ukrainians on the front.
Let me bring you closer to home, Surian, in regard to this story on the front of a couple of the papers today, this fury as ethnic minority, transgender, neurodiverse criminals could get softer sentences. This is the Sentencing Council. This is not just some rogue civil servant. This is not a junior employee. This is the Right Honourable Baroness Carr of Walton-on-the-Hill, the Lady Chief Justice of England and Wales, and her Sentencing Council of 14 very senior people, including the Director of the Crown Prosecution Service, that is putting this forward. What's your reaction?
Well, first of all, I'm very, very against what's happened over the last 30 or 40 years. There's been the drift into unelected bodies making decisions that are really parliaments. So interpreting, in the old days, what used to happen is where there was a clash between the ability of the judges to make a decision based on bad law, the law that couldn't be interpreted properly, and then they would throw it back to Parliament and say Parliament has to change this or sort it out. Instead of which now we've inserted these quangos in, and they're not elected and they make decisions. Now Parliament is supreme. Whichever way we want independent judges and the law being independent, it is Parliament that sets the law. So Parliament must change the law or debate that change in the law. So what happens with these quangos, it sounds like the Justice Secretary didn't even know about it.
That's right. That's right.
So the key thing is here, frankly, I would say to this quango, if they look up at the top of the Old Bailey, they will see a statue called Lady Justice. It's quite interesting. Lady Justice has scales and a sword representing the balance and the importance of law to change things. But she also has one other thing, which is blindfolds on her eyes, because justice must be blind. And this set of recommendations would have stripped that blindfold off Lady Justice to make justice no longer blind. And the importance of being blind when you talk about justice is that you don't take account of anything else except for the criminal and their behavior.
can't disagree with a single word of that. Sireen, you were working pensions secretary when you brought in and wanted to bring in serious changes to the way things worked. You were cut off at the knees by George Osborne and his absolute vandalism of your agenda. Rachel Reeves now wants to make big cuts to Britain's welfare bill. She's preparing to blame world events for that. What do you think should happen? How can we fix welfare?
Well, it's interesting because actually by the time I resigned over my disagreements with the Treasury over what they were doing, we did actually get the numbers of workless households in the UK were down to record low levels, the lowest that they've ever been. We also managed to get some of that cost in check. Ironically, the person opposite me who complained about every single change that I made was in fact Rachel Reeves. And now she is facing a kind of moment, really, of that dish that you eat cold eventually.
Of course, because she was shadow welfare working. She was shadow working pension secretary, wasn't she? Yes.
She accused me of all sorts of things, and is now saying that they have to cut welfare. What we did is we reformed it to make work the way out, and we kept. It was difficult, but we got the numbers down. And the important thing right now is sickness benefit has ballooned dramatically. It'll be double what I left pretty much in about 2 to 3 years. Yes, COVID was part of that, and I blame my own government in part for the fact that we took our eye off the ball. But the universal credit offers this government the way out. And we've now got sickness benefit coming in. This is my row with George Osborne. We should have had sickness benefit into UC, but he didn't want to invest the money. And the thing is, with sickness benefit and universal credit, you can now track every single person who's on that benefit. And what we want to say to them is, you can all go to work. Even if you got this benefit, go to work, and we will taper it off you under universal credit so that you will eventually be independent of the state. But work is the way to get people off this. And the best, 60% of all claims now are mental health, and about 50 to 60% of those are literally anxiety and depression. What is the best treatment for anxiety and depression? Work.
Yeah.
It's acknowledged that by the health department. So tackle that lot. And we did the Centre for Social Justice, which I set up, did a survey the other day, and they found that 700,000 people on sickness benefit want to work, but they're so confused about the rules around it that they're really worried about getting penalized if they go to work. The answer is get rid of the rules, say go to work, do it honestly, otherwise we'll prosecute you, and as you go to work, we will taper this off you in due course, and you'll be independent, because work is the best treatment for your condition.
I wonder just finally, Sireen, I have a very good friend, one of my best friends, who has multiple sclerosis. Some days she can do a full day's work, some days she can do a bit of work, some days she can't do any work at all, and she doesn't know how she's going to feel until she wakes up in the morning. This is a long-term, chronic, life-limiting condition that she is dealing with, and she's dealing with it very, very well. I wonder, do we have to be more creative within that? Because there's so much people working from home, people being able to do some work, working part-time, working flexibly, and I just think in regard to illness, and illness which is up and down in various ways, like multiple sclerosis or many other conditions where people can do some work, surely there should be some acceptance of that and flexibility for that within the system.
Well, it's interesting you raise this because Rachel Reeves was one of those who attacked me incessantly about zero-hour contracts. And the way that the Labour movement presented this as some sort of imposition on people, it was terrible. It meant that they never knew what their position was. The truth about zero-hour contracts, when we polled it, over 70%, 75% of those who were on zero-hour contracts wanted to be on zero-hour contracts. Why? Because rather like your case, somebody who finds some days it's impossible, other days they can, they need a flexible contract which allows them to do the work when they feel okay to do the work, or if they have caring responsibilities. So one week they might be taking somebody to see a specialist, the next week they'll be free. Under a fixed contract, it's very difficult to give you that flexibility. Zero-hour contract said, when you come to work, we'll pay you for that work. Now, the Labour Party was dead against this, and now under the new employment bill they're pushing through, this will tie knots in zero-hour contracts, get rid of those that they don't like. And the answer is that flexibility that was a key to the British economy is going to be got rid of. And Labour is going to find that this will just do more damage to the economy because fewer people will actually then go to work because it's too strict, the way in which they're expected to work. So, and there are conditions, you're quite right, things like slow onset of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, where there are days when people are okay and they're progressive, we know, other days when they won't. This flexibility is absolutely vital because they don't want to sit at home if they're capable of going out and just languish with nobody there. What they want is company, companionship, a sense of purpose. That's what work does for you. It builds you as characters and helps you live your life. And so now Labour's heading in two different directions. They want to get welfare down. The way to get welfare down, for the most part, is to get people back in work. It gives them a sense of purpose, gives the household a sense. The kids grow up believing in work, instead of which they're going to end up killing that through their bill. But at the same time, they want to reduce welfare spending. And you don't do that just by taking an axe to it. You have to reform it.
It might also help them with something else they're very keen on, something called growth. I wonder I wonder if you'll be sitting on the green benches while Rachel Reeves talks about welfare in the next few weeks, thinking perhaps of the Chinese general Sun Tzu, who said that if you sit by the river long enough, the bodies of your enemies will come floating by. Sireen, thank you very much indeed. Sireen Duncan-Smith there, the former leader of the Conservatives. A lot in that, but specifically on the work issue, we've got to get people back to work. We've got to, and that will drive growth, and that's the silver bullet, isn't it?
We do, and I've got a very radical idea for the government. You get, especially aimed at the young people, because a large proportion of those that are on benefits are young people not getting into work. We turn around and say that after a set period of time on benefits, you will go off to be assessed for automatic employment into public service. Part of that public service could be the armed forces, who can't recruit at the moment. They will check whether people are physically able to come and work. That would give a lot of people with their anxiety, with their mental health
problems.
Sounding a lot
like Rishi Sunak in national service there, Philip.
Yes, but it'll give them a sense of family. It'll give them a sense of belonging. It'll give them training that they can add to the country. And at the moment where our armed forces are very short, we need to recruit more people. That would then incentivize people to either go and get employment themselves, or to go, actually, no, this sounds quite good, and do it. Rishi Sunak's idea was quite a good idea.
It's a great career in the military. Wouldn't have suited me because I can barely run the length of myself, but there are many people it would hugely benefit. Just another line, the Kremlin has said that Emmanuel Macron's speech last night was extremely confrontational and claimed that France wants the war to continue. Philip?
Well, yeah, Macron's speech last night was fascinating. I think the confrontational bit is between Macron and Starmer, because they are trying to manoeuvre themselves as to who is seen as the strong man of Europe, albeit we are outside Europe, but in dealing with and acting as that bridge to the United States. We saw the power play with the visit to Donald Trump between Macron and Trump, and we saw a similar power play between Starmer and Trump, in both their body language and the way they were correcting him and everything else. So I took that speech as aimed as much at Starmer and European countries as aimed at the Russians.
Very interesting. Also on the two-tier justice, Bill has said that the Sentencing Council should be abolished. Let's hear a voice note now from Moz on this.
Morning, Cardi P. I've been saying for a long time now that the new form of racism isn't against other ethnicities. It's purely against the white person. It's just gone insane. And it's not classed as racism because it's justified because of apparently we enslaved everyone. We cannot be held accountable for our ancestors. You know what, Cardi P, there's reform coming to this country, and there are more and more people stepping out now and stepping up for this local elections coming in May. And I think there's going to be an earthquake, which this government will never understand.
Well, it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens in those local elections just a couple of months from now. We're going to talk in a second about the BBC, because the 14-year-old who narrated the documentary about Gaza is whinging because he says, I was very impartial in this documentary. Sorry, I can't read that without laughing. He now says he and his family, this is the 14-year-old in Gaza who narrated the documentary that's now been pulled from the BBC for being ridiculously biased. He says he and his family have been targeted by cyberbullying, harassment and all kinds of things. My heart bleeds for you, Abdullah, and that's because obviously your family would not have been involved in any form of targeting, harassment or all kinds of things, except, oh, hold on a second, what does your dad do? Oh yes, he's a Hamas terrorist. Stay with us here on Talk.
Well, the mistake was on those people who fell for that absolutely empty propaganda. His record speaks for itself. He didn't stop a single boat. They continue to come over in great number. And any party that does stop the boat will almost certainly not only be an election winning force, but they will remain in power for a lot longer than they would otherwise. It beggars belief, and I find that I'm endlessly bewildered.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, the controversy over the Gaza documentary that the BBC pulled from the iPlayer continues, and now the 14-year-old boy involved, Abdullah al-Yazuri from Gaza, he contributed, in fact narrated it. There are all sorts of problems with it, of course, and guess what? He's the son of a Hamas terrorist. The BBC is trying to work this all out, trying to do a big inquiry into it and work out what on earth happened in the first place. It's a massive scandal, and it's emerged that £790 of your money, licence fee payers' money, was paid to this 14-year-old's sister. His father is called Ayman al-Yazuri. He is the Deputy Agriculture Minister in the Hamas-run government. Hamas are terrorists. Hamas are running Gaza. Well, they're not running it particularly at the moment, but certainly his father is a Hamas terrorist. This was not disclosed at any point, and Abdullah, the 14-year-old, says, I was very impartial in this documentary. Sorry to burst your bubble, Abdullah, I'm not sure you were. And he said his family have been targeted by cyberbullying, harassment, and all kinds of things. Well, his father is a Hamas terrorist. He has stood over the actions of Hamas terrorists in maiming, in killing, in the 7th of October attacks, which were absolutely horrendous, in all that Hamas have done since, in holding hostages, in killing civilians. So you'll forgive me if my heart doesn't bleed for this very privileged 14-year-old who's gone to an incredibly expensive school and is the sort of scion of a Hamas terrorist dynasty. The BBC is in a lot of trouble about this as well. Natasha Hausdorff is a barrister and also legal director at UK Lawyers for Israel. I want to talk to Natasha about what Trump has told Hamas, which is pretty direct and I think a very good message, but we'll talk about that in a second. Specifically on the Hamas chief's son, he says the BBC are responsible if anything happens to me. Are you as sympathetic as I am? I think you're on mute, Natasha, and we're just trying to... Oh, there we are. You're back now. What do you think about this?
Well, in light of the manner in which the BBC have served as a Hamas mouthpiece for the last 16 months at least, I think there is a responsibility on them for the suffering of Palestinians in general, in encouraging Hamas, of course, to continue its war against Israelis and in dragging out and perpetuating this conflict. So far more so than
you actually blame the BBC for helping perpetuate this conflict. That's a huge charge, Natasha.
But justifiably so, when one looks at the way in which Hamas propaganda has been coming out of the BBC, and undoubtedly, as I have been hearing in meetings with officials, policymakers and politicians all around the world, that they are basing their opinions on the developing situation in the Middle East and specifically in Gaza, on what they are witnessing on the BBC. When we recognise that nothing comes out of Gaza that hasn't been approved by Hamas in the way of reporting, and when the BBC, and they're not alone in this, but when the BBC, which is supposed to hold up a standard that is recognisable around the world for honesty and journalistic integrity, when they fail to communicate to their viewership that they are constrained in what they are able to report, and that what is being put out is everything that Hamas wishes the world to see.
They're constrained by Israel as well, though, aren't they? Because Israel say that they're not allowed to be in Gaza as well. It's not just Hamas.
Well, let's just be clear about that. There is freedom of press in Israel. There are no restrictions other than very necessary military censorship, as there has been, of course, in the UK when we in Great Britain were similarly engaged in armed conflict. So there is entire freedom of press. What the contrast of this is, and of course it's not just Hamas, I mean there are examples of it also with respect to Lebanon and Hezbollah, and in that respect, let me give you this example. I know journalist colleagues who have embedded with the IDF in Lebanon, who have been amongst other journalists who've made it perfectly clear they need to be very careful about what they report because of their colleagues in Beirut and because of essentially what Hezbollah will do to them if they report the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So where you have reportage coming out of areas that are controlled by terrorist organizations, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, there is a responsibility on journalists with integrity to indicate that this is not free reporting. And this latest BBC documentary, which understandably has caused so much of a stir, exposed as it was by the brilliant investigative journalism of David Collier, that is just the tip of the iceberg. It is reflective of an attitude amongst journalists broadly. The BBC is perhaps chiefly responsible here because of the higher standards that it is meant to uphold, of simply parroting what they are being told by terrorist organisations, and this has to stop.
Just quickly, I just want to ask you about the Trump on social media, on Truth Social. He has issued a last warning to Hamas after the US opened unprecedented talks with the terrorist group, and Adam Bowler, who is his envoy for hostage affairs, actually met Hamas terrorists in Qatar. He wrote on social media, President Trump did, "Shalom, Hamas means hello and goodbye. You can choose. Release all of the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it's over for you. Only sick and twisted people keep bodies, and you are sick and twisted."
I'd say some 16 months too late. If only we'd heard that from the previous administration at the very start of this conflict on the 7th of October, when these people were brutally abducted and others were murdered, raped, tortured. It is important that the civilized world sends a very clear message to savages like Hamas, like Hezbollah, who have absolutely no thought for human life and who celebrate death. And that we tell these death cults that they will not be successful in their efforts to target civilians, but also importantly to target Western civilization more broadly.
Natasha, thank you. That's Natasha Hausdorff, who is a barrister and legal director of UK Lawyers for Israel. Philip, what do you think should happen at the BBC? Should people lose their jobs as a result of this documentary?
I think there should be criminal prosecutions because, under the counter-terrorism laws that we have in this country, if you provide money to a prescribed organisation, you've committed an offence under the Terrorism Act. So the production company that did this, the BBC producers that helped book it, the editors that oversaw it and signed it off, are all guilty under the Terrorism Act, and they should be prosecuted and they should be held accountable. If they are white and British, they will get harsher sentences than if they're not.
It's a very good point, and we're going to continue to talk about that. In fact, we've got Dr. Rakib Hassan, who is a social policy analyst and author of Beyond Grievance, What the Left Gets Wrong About Ethnic Minorities, about this ludicrous two-tier justice idea that has been put forward by Sue Carr, the Lady Chief Justice Baroness Carr. And we also know that President Zelensky has arrived at the European Defence Summit in Brussels. He's been greeted by Chesney Hawkes lookalike Ursula von der Leyen, who is the President of the European Commission. We will bring you the latest from there and talk about that with Philip as time goes on. Lots to discuss in the next hour. We'll also be talking to Harry Cole, who is presenting Drive today. He will be in this chair between 4 and 7. And he's got Nigel Farage, who will be taking calls from you. If you want to get your voice on the air now, between now and 1 o'clock with Philip and with me, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call for that. Plenty more to discuss. We want your voice in the conversation too, here on Talk.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come
crunch time. Williams who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, Oivamo slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell, in for Julia Hartley-Brewer today. Julia's unwell. She will be back next week. Lots to discuss this morning, including the scandal of two-tier justice. This hasn't come from a strange quango. This hasn't come from a policy think tank. This hasn't come from an MP. This has come from the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales. That is Baroness Sue Carr, who is saying through her sentencing counsel that if you're not white and not straight, you should be treated differently and given a less harsh sentence in the justice system. It's an absolute scandal. We're talking about it this morning. Yes, really. The Sentencing Council, which has all sorts of senior people on it, including the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, Keir Starmer's successor, a man called Stephen Parkinson, they are saying that you should get a less harsh sentence if you're an ethnic minority, if you're neurodiverse, if you are transgender. It is utterly, utterly mad. Justice is meant to be blind. That is what Ian Duncan Smith has told us in the last half an hour. We're going to be discussing that here on Talk. We're also going to be talking to Harry Cole. He is in the chair between 4 and 7 today with Talk Drive. He will be interviewing Nigel Farage. He'll be taking your calls. We'll also talk about the net zero lunacy and the cost of heat pumps with Ross Clark, who also has written a fascinating article this week about why the left hate Gales, the upmarket bakery. We'll talk about that. Lots to discuss. I want to discuss it with you too. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, you can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on the main number 0344 499 1000. Well, I'm delighted that Philip Ingram is with me for the whole of the show. Philip is a former senior military intelligence officer. Philip, great to see you this morning. The big story today, two-tier justice, the move that means ethnic and faith minorities are less likely to go to prison. How on earth has this been happening?
I don't know how the Justice Secretary has allowed this to get out of her department without her knowledge and the guidelines to go out. I understand it's independent and it's right and proper that we don't have an American-style judicial system which is political appointees at the top where you can get political influence on sentencing. But actually, as Sir Ian Duncan Smith said, we need to get back to the point where our judges don't set new interpretations of the law by precedents where those interpretations should more properly be set in Parliament and send stuff back to Parliament instead of continuing with the wokeness that there is throughout society today.
Let us know what you think about this. 0344 499 1000. Robert Jenrick is the Shadow Justice Secretary, and he was talking to Mike Graham a little bit earlier earlier on in this morning, and he says the sentencing guidelines are a disgrace.
The sentencing guidelines that we uncovered yesterday are a complete disgrace. They show that if you're a woman, if you're neurodiverse, if you're trans, if you're an ethnic minority, if you're from a minority faith group, presumably anyone who isn't Christian, then you are going to get a different treatment under the law. You are less likely to get a custodial sentence. Frankly, this is blatant bias against Christians and straight white men. And many, many people will be rightly furious at this. Your viewers and listeners were sneered at when they said that there was two-tier justice in this country. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, said that we were conspiracy theorists for saying so. Well, here it is, in black and white, the law of the land, the Sentencing Council issuing guidance to every magistrate in this country, telling them to treat people differently on the colour of their skin or the faith that they abide by. It's wrong and it needs to be stopped.
The Sentencing Council has 14 very senior people on it, magistrates, judges, High Court judges. The Lady Chief Justice, Sue Carr, Baroness Carr, is there as well. We also know, I promise you, there's someone called Joe King on it, and there must be Joe King with this ludicrous idea that has been put forward. Robert Jenrick told us earlier as well that he heard about this when the guidance went out to a magistrate.
I was emailed by a magistrate who, like many, many others across the country, received an email from the Ministry of Justice, Shabana Mahmood's own department, telling them that this was now the rules that they should be abiding by from the end of the month. So how she didn't know about this, God only knows, but that was the case. We got it into Parliament. Now we've got it, thanks to you and many others, into the living rooms and in the newspapers across the country. We've got to stop this. I don't want to live in a country where you are treated differently depending on whether you're a straight white man or a Hindu woman. This is totally wrong and it has to end.
Robert Jenrick pointing out that an accident of birth is the reason that Baroness Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, thinks there should be some form of mitigation in your sentence. An accident of birth, the colour of your skin, or something that you cannot control, for example, your religion or your sexuality, it is absolutely outrageous. I'm going to stick up for Shabana Mahmood, actually. Robert Jenrick was critical of the Justice Secretary there. She didn't know about this, and it's impossible for any Secretary of State to know everything that happens, especially from bodies that are independent, some of whom will specifically try, I know because I worked in government for 3.5 years, including in the Ministry of Justice, some of whom will specifically try to hoodwink their political masters. And Shabana Mahmood put out a tweet on this and said, "The Sentencing Council is entirely independent. Today's updated guidelines do not represent my views or the views of this government. I will be writing to the Sentencing Council to register my displeasure and to recommend reversing this changed guidance. As someone who is from an ethnic minority background myself, I do not stand for any differential treatment before the law for anyone of any kind. There will never be a two-tier sentencing approach under my watch." So well done, Shabana Mahmood. Well done to the Justice Secretary. It should have been caught beforehand. That's partly her fault. It's partly her team's fault. It's partly her civil servants' fault. But it needs to be reversed. Let's talk to Dr. Rakib Ehsan, who is a social policy analyst and author of Beyond Grievance, What the Left Gets Wrong About Ethnic Minorities. Rakib, are you as astonished as I am, but also kind of not astonished?
I'm not particularly surprised. I've been talking about two-tier governance in modern Britain for some time now, and we've had institutions such as the BBC, we've had Home Office, civil servants, ultimately dismissing these perfectly legitimate concerns as some kind of extreme right-wing myth.
Well, Angela Rayner called it conspiracy theories.
Indeed, there is a conspiracy theory, and I think that these latest guidelines issued by the Sentencing Council for England and Wales, it underscores the reality of two-tier governance. This is ultimately suggesting the introduction of a tiered criminal justice system where pre-sentence reports would normally be considered if the offender falls into a particular group or cohort, including whether or not they belong to an ethnic, religious or cultural minority. And I think the big problem I have here, Peter, is that if this was to go ahead, ultimately what you'd see is cultural values and religious/philosophical beliefs ultimately being used or being framed as mitigating factors, and offenders ultimately potentially being given lighter sentences as a result of that. That is the definition of two-tier governance.
Is it too much? I don't want to sort of fuel this. I don't want to be outrageous or controversial simply for the sake of being controversial. But will there be, I think about grooming gangs, for example, rape gangs, as they should be called. Presumably, there would be some aspect of this where mitigation would be put forward and say, well, actually, as has been said on numerous different occasions, this is kind of a cultural issue. Is this something that is going to mitigate sentences because of this plan? That's something I would worry about. I don't want to be controversial for the sake of being controversial, but because we've been told that a lot of this horrendous rape of children is to do with cultural issues, could that be something within these guidance, within this guidance that actually mitigates sentences, that actually makes sentences shorter?
I don't think that's an exaggeration at all. That is my primary concern when it comes to these latest guidelines issued by the Sentencing Council. And I think this is what I call the rise of the multicultural identitarian state. This is not about treating citizens fairly. This is ultimately undermining equality before the law. And I think it's very clear that if you want to talk about having a criminal justice system based on fairness, equality, and neutrality, these guidelines go exactly against that. They're directly opposed to that. And I think I'll make this point as well, that you have public bodies such as the Sentencing Council. They're subject to the Public Sector Equality Act. Public sector equality duty, sorry. That means that they should be combating discrimination, they should be fostering good relations between people, and they should be promoting equality. Again, these new guidelines go against that. And I think crucially, this is the risk here. There's a very real cultural backlash, I think, that's in full flow at the moment. And this kind of thing will exacerbate that, where you're ultimately raising ethnic consciousness among the white British majority. And that will lead to a less harmonious society.
So yes, you're absolutely right. When you start looking at your differences, you start noticing them, and you start thinking about it, and you start making all sorts of. Whereas I just want people to be treated equally before the law. I don't care what people's background is. I don't care what people's sexuality is. I just want fairness, and that's what our viewers and listeners want as well. I am honestly quite worried about Sue Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, Baroness Carr. She says that judges should be independent. I'm absolutely happy for judges to be independent. I don't want a politicised system as they have in America and many other countries. I don't want a system by which a political leader can tell a judge what to do. What I am worried about is I think there's a pattern of behaviour here. This is my opinion on this, because we've seen on the 18th of February, for example, that she criticised both Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch, who criticised a judge's ruling on an immigration case. Now, the ruling was specifically that a Palestinian family from Gaza should be allowed to come to the UK. A family of 6, a mother, father and 4 children, has sought permission to live with a British relative who proved he was able to house and financially support them. But the point is that that was done under legislation for Ukrainians fleeing the war. It was nothing to do with Gaza. Kemi Badenoch said a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. The decision is completely wrong and cannot be allowed to stand. Are the government planning to appeal on any points of law, and if so, which ones? So the government obviously were involved in that case. Now, Lady Carr said the remarks from both Keir Starmer, who said it should be Parliament that makes the rules on immigration, and Kemi Badenoch were unacceptable and conflicted with the duty of politicians to uphold the rule of law and respect the independent rule of judges. Sorry, who do you think you are, Sue?
No, absolutely. I think that judicial overreach is a very serious problem. Now, of course, I support an independent judiciary, but I think that if it gets to a stage where judges are ultimately undercutting the immigration and asylum policy of a democratically elected government, I do think there's a problem there. And I think with this Sentencing Council, it's a public body and it has very real responsibilities. And I think that to advise the courts of England and Wales to ultimately, in my view, this risks treating minorities in a favourable way, that they become beneficiaries of preferential treatment. And I think that's a very serious problem, especially from a social cohesion perspective. And I think that it would undermine wider public confidence in the criminal justice system in terms of how it works and functions.
Rakib, thank you. That's Dr. Rakib Ehsan, who is a social policy analyst and author of Beyond Grievance, What the Left Gets Wrong About Ethnic Minorities. And Philip, there is this very real possibility, as Rakib says, that cultural issues, that other issues will be brought forward and used as excuses for criminal behaviour, for rapists, for murderers, for armed robbers, for people who commit very, very serious crimes, saying, oh, well, actually, it's to do with my ethnicity, it's to do with my background, it's to do with cultural issues. No, the law should be very straightforward and it should be applied equally.
The law should be, but I think we've already seen that, because I have seen reports over the last year where individuals have been let off rapes, sexual assaults, because they didn't understand that this was inappropriate in our country. They had come in from other countries and other cultures. And
what happened to ignorance being no defence?
Well, exactly, you know. and judges have not sent them to prison for these sorts of attacks. So we've had this unofficially going on in our judiciary. I think there's something wrong with that at the very heart of our judiciary, and there needs to be clear direction brought back into it again. And if the Sentencing Council can't do it, if they're part of the problem, they need their terms of reference redone, and there needs to be someone else put in at the head of it who knows where the line is. Because you know, using the Ukraine law, the key is it was for Ukrainians. And what they should have done was then gone back and gone, is this applicable to anyone else? Please,
but I'm actually more worried about the fact that Sue Carr thinks that we shouldn't be allowed to criticise judges.
We must be allowed to criticise judges.
And political leaders should be allowed to criticise judges. I mean, I was told many years ago when I worked for the BBC, don't criticise a judge on air. Well, I'm doing it right now. I'm criticising Lady Carr, and my strongly held personal belief, she's got this one wrong. She's got it wrong on the 18th of February when she's talking about the Gazan family, and she needs to take a long, hard look at her role and the things that she does and the decisions that she and her sentencing council are making. Andrew in Hertfordshire has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Andrew, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good morning. You do a crap.
Oh, it's a really bad line, Andrew. I'm afraid. Do you know what? We'll come back to you, I promise, when we get you on a better line. We'll make sure we get Andrew on. But we're going to talk to Harry Cole in just a second. Harry's in this seat between 4 and 7 today, presenting Drive. And he's got Nigel Farage on. We'll get his views on the big political issues of the day, including this two-tier justice issue and many other aspects as well, including what he's got planned for his programme. Stay with us here on Talk.
Well, I oppose the Iraq War, but I think it's worthwhile pointing out that this country was pretty much the first country to come to the assistance of Uncle Sam when he declared his war on terror.
Yep.
And I remember serving in Iraq alongside a brave American serviceman. And I tell you this, I also remember lining the streets of Royal Wood and Bassett as those coffins with the Union flag on top came back with our boys inside. And I'm not going to take any lessons from the Vice President or the President or whoever you like.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Harry Cole is the political editor of The Sun. He's also presenting today on Drive between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock, and I'm delighted that he's here in the studio with me today. Harry, you've got quite the guest coming up later on.
Well, it's going to be a lively afternoon. We've got Nigel Farage. He's written for The Sun today. Big page 10 in The Sun, all about how the lunacy of net zero is decimating Britain's industry, and that's why he thinks he's ahead of Labour in the Northern Heartland. So we'll stress test that theory later. He's going to take some calls from Sun readers, from Talk listeners. We've got the government minister Luke Pollard coming on, the Armed Forces minister. It couldn't be more timely as we're about to, could potentially send British troops to Ukraine, which isn't necessarily the most thought-out plan, I think. And then we'll have some Tories on as well, who are obviously cock-a-hoop about all of this two-tier stuff.
And we'll talk about that in a second. We've heard, of course, from Robert Jenrick on this earlier on today, but also just specifically what you're talking about there with in regard to Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky is in Brussels. He's thanked European leaders for their support at today's summit. During all this period last week, you've stayed with us. From all Ukrainians, we have a big appreciation. We're all very thankful. We are not alone. These are not just words. We feel it, and it's been called a watershed moment by Chesney Hawkes lookalike Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. Where do you think this is going, Harry?
Well, I think the sort of the penny is dropping, or the euro centime is dropping across the channel, in the fact that you saw what Donald Trump said. He is not going to pay up anymore, and I think the European countries for so long have, as Macron admitted in his speech last night, have lived on the US taxpayers' subsidy, and so I think they're going to bang their heads together, I hope, and agree some format of another big funding round for Ukraine to get them through to the summer, as the US have turned off the taps temporarily, we hope, and also how they're going to get their defence spending up. I think the critical mistake they will make, though, and I can see them walking into this, is they're going to have such a strop that they're going to go, we don't need NATO, we're going to have our own EU army, we're going to have our own EU defence pact, we're going to go completely the wrong direction, set up another pointless Brussels-based bureaucracy, easy for me to say, good luck trying to repeat that one, and end up wasting billions of pounds, billions and billions and billions of euros, setting up their own thing, when actually they should just cough up, get their defence spending up and contribute to NATO properly.
And Lavrov has said this morning that he would consider, and Russia would consider, any NATO troops or troops from any NATO country as hostile forces, essentially.
Well, this is a negotiation at the end of the day. I think the reason that Donald Trump is being so sort of aggressive to the Ukrainians and sort of lavishing praise on the Russians, it isn't really some sort of Russian agent or anything, that nonsense like that. I think basically he promised to end the war in 24 hours. He promised to end the war in a week. He promised to end the war in what would he now 45 days into his presidency, and there's no sign of this war ending. I think he is slightly beginning to think he is overpromised and he's potentially going to underdeliver on this. There's no sign of the Russians coming to the table at the moment. It is a negotiation, but I think Trump has realised that he needs to be seen as a sort of fair player between the two sides by the Kremlin before they can even consider coming to the table. So I think he's slightly trying to rebalance it's not very edifying to watch, and it's actually quite uncomfortable to watch, but he's trying to send a signal to the Russians that if you do a negotiation with the US as the sort of middleman, it will be a fair negotiation, because at the moment Putin's looking at this going, why am I going to come to the table when the cards are already stacked against me?
I'm not playing cards.
Zelensky
said.
It's going to be a long day if we start doing our accents.
Well, it certainly is. Let's not do that. We'll be doing Keir Starmer impressions in a minute. Yeah, the Metropolitan Police. Right. Let's talk about two-tier justice in this country. This is a very, very serious issue. I'm really worried about it. Sue Carr exceeding her brief by the sound of things.
Oh, look, this has obviously been, the Sentencing Council. This is what happens when you sort of you allow these independent quangos and sort of arm's length bodies too much power, and then stuff them full of a bunch of pinkos. This is what happens. They end up.
She's the Lady Chief Justice of this country. She's earned her position. She's not just some pinko go.
No. I'm talking about, if you look at the committees, look at the committees and the boards and the bodies that make up all of these things. We went through this a few years ago with the parole board. Do you remember when they tried to let out John Warboys because he was the black cab rapist was a nice reformed fella? Come on, and they had to have this exact same battle where the Secretary of State, the Lord Chancellor, had to essentially crack the whip and say no. That ended up changing the law. We ended up actually having transparency on the parole boards, and so we can actually see who are these people that are making these decisions. Look, this decision is clearly crackers. The Secretary of State is saying that actually she has no power to stop it because it's going to come into force on the 1st of April by hook or by crook. That's wrong. She has the power to change the law. Labour have a massive stonking majority. Kemi Badenoch's out this morning and saying, we will back you. A one-line bill to say this is not happening. Yeah. Parliament are the lawmakers. For too long, we keep seeing this. We saw it under Sunak as well. And Keir Starmer does it the whole time. He goes, oh, well, it's the law. The law should... Well, if the law is an ass, change the law.
Yes.
What is the point of having this stonking great majority if you're going to do nothing with it? And so I think it's a really interesting first test, I think. This is probably the most effective and damaging thing the Tories in opposition have done. They've dug up so far. Saying they've had 8 months in opposition. They haven't been that great. They need to... they've sort of been sort of shell-shocked from their defeat all over the place. They went through that long leadership election. This is actually the first proper old-school bit of opposition causing the government maximum pain. It was a complete hijack yesterday in the House when Jemrick, who is a very talented man by all, as we were beginning to see, basically jumped the Secretary of State. She had no idea what it was.
She was completely blindsided.
And then when she found out about it, she was furious. Now, look, you can say, and I know you've been defending us today, and I think, look, she's saying the right things, but the fact is that it was able to go through her private office, through the entire MOJ without someone spotting it. Why did no one go, sorry?
Or they did spot it and said nothing, which is worse.
Yes, exactly.
Which is worse. Now, having worked in the Ministry of Justice, and government more generally, as you know, Harry, it's 99% cock up, 1% conspiracy, and I just don't think there's a cabal running the world because they're not that organised.
Or thought it was fine. Or thought it was a good idea.
I thought it was a good idea, or thought, you know what, we'll not bother the Secretary of State with this because she'll think it's fine.
She's in Texas looking at prisons. I mean, come on, this is it's all very well flying around the world, looking hard by visiting big prisons in America, but actually this, she's being humiliated here, and it's very, very embarrassing.
Harry, what is Nigel Farage writing about? Tell us a bit more about the article for those who perhaps haven't seen it in the Sun today.
He has written about the deindustrialisation of Britain, which I think would be the FT headline. The Sun headline is net zero lunacy is decimating British industries. Looking at the chemicals industries, the cement industries, our oil refineries, all of this stuff is on the altar of the drive to net zero. And we know we've talked a lot about how people are going to need to get heat pumps and electric cars and insulate their homes, and the domestic sort of costs to the household budgets of this drive to net zero. And it's not 2050. There's some serious targets kicking in for decarbonisation of industry, and it means that we're losing all of these plants, we're losing all of these jobs. People are scrambling around to try and find new work, and these are in areas that are traditionally Labour strongholds, where reforms seem to be, if you believe Nigel Farage, if you believe the polls, doing incredibly well. And he puts that not down to his own wit and charm, but the fact is that people are seeing their livelihoods be sacrificed on the altar of a political ideology, which is the drive to net zero by 2050. And it is breaking British industry, and there's going to be nothing left. And what replaces it? These mythical jobs in green and wind and solar and going to be a security guard at a massive data farm, which they want to build on ring roads around Britain. It's not going to... The transition it's basically breaking stuff down too quickly without rebuilding it. And there's going to be a crunch coming, and that's what I think he's going to capitalise on.
Philip, there are plenty of questions for Nigel Farage later on, I'm sure. Maybe on net zero, maybe on Ukraine, maybe in something else. What would you ask him if you were suggesting to Harry what to grill Nigel Farage on?
Oh, there's so much. Nigel, I'd like to understand whenever what's going to be the trigger for him to take this group of mates that is Reform in Parliament at the minute and start to develop it into a proper political entity. Is he waiting for the local election results before he does that and everything else? But the other thing, more widely, that I think we need to drill into is the fact that, you know, if the EU goes down this line of creating some form of new EU force, which I agree, I think they might try and do. Macron's speech last night was him fighting with Starmer over who's got control in Europe. Why people aren't looking at what NATO has a plan already, and it's got a plan already where the United States doesn't come into a NATO operation. It's purely EU plus Canada and others that come in. That's been practiced. That's why the Deputy Supreme Commander was always a British and is always a British officer, so that if the Americans say we're not playing, they can step up and the Europeans can come in. And the EU countries have all signed up to that, apart from those that are neutral, like Ireland and all the rest of it. We're not hearing that talked about. We should be hearing more of that.
How long have you got him for?
Hopefully about a good half an hour. So we'll get
Excellent. Plenty to get through.
Absolutely, but we'll get some listeners calls in. We'll hope to get some WhatsApps in. And
wonderful stuff.
I've been practicing the number. Yeah.
Excellent, yes. Get it right.
Twister, isn't it?
Well, it's literally written in front of you there, which is
99 1000. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, exactly. Very good.
I've written it on my hand as well.
Oh, very good, very good. Yes, excellent. Maybe you can put it on a contact lens and have it in your eye. It's imprinted in my brain anyway. Lots to discuss with Harry later on. That is on Drive between 4 and 7 with Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun, sitting in this chair. And as Harry says, you can put your question to Nigel Farage 0344 499 1000, and that is the number to call right now. In fact, you can use the break to lift the phone if you want to, because there's a lot to talk about, including two-tier justice. We're going to talk about net zero lunacy a little bit later on as well, and why the left hate Gaels. You know the bakery? Yeah, they really do. We're going to talk about that too. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
James has got in touch via WhatsApp, and he says, on two-tier justice, are these cultures and identities meaning they're more likely to break the law? Why do we allow them in this country at all? I don't think a culture and identity means you're more likely to break the law. I think people know right from wrong, but some people don't, and they use it as an excuse. Adrian in Bexhill says, morning Peter, regarding sentencing rules, even if the guidance is withdrawn, it is too late. The seed has been planted and it will be in the back of magistrates and judges' mind from now on. Adrian says, thank you for your excellent balanced work. Well, thank you. Ken says, why isn't Dr. Hassan a key advisor to the government? Total common sense and clarity of thought from him every time he is interviewed. Can't disagree with that. Andrew in Hertfordshire, I think we've got you back on a better line. What would you like to say, Andrew?
I think it's a really good thing this has happened, and it's a real positive for the country, because now it happened on Labour's watch, because these are Labour's type of people, and you reap what you sow in life. So these are Starmer's type of people that are making these decisions. And you were very good this morning when you talked about how bad it would be to have political judges. But you can see why people would do that.
Yeah.
Because now you've got the public are distanced so much from the decision that they make to put a government in power. But the root sadness of this is victims.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen is people will get less of a sentence, they'll commit more offences, and that's all very well unless you're the child being abused or the woman being sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
So what actually it is a law that will enable more offences.
Well, I just think I know this guy's been convicted, so we can talk about this, Andrew. We can talk about the case. He's going to be sentenced, but I don't think I'm going to prejudice the sentence. I mean, on the front, it's very telling, I think. We've got on the front page of the Daily Mail this morning, you've got now two-tier justice fiasco. That's one of the stories. And the other main story is about the son of a Chinese Communist Party official who's one of the UK's most prolific racists. His name is Zhenzhou Zhu, and he may have had 60 victims. Now, there's great work done by a very important team in the Crown Prosecution Service and the police to get him to trial. He's been convicted. And he'll be sentenced, and he won't be sentenced under these guidelines. But imagine if this was in 6 months' time, and his lawyers argued and said, well, you know, he didn't understand the culture of this country, he's from China, there's a language barrier. Actually, his sentence should be lesser as a result. And Andrew, you raise a really, really good question there. What kind of screwed up message does this send to people when you're telling them, both people from this country and elsewhere, don't break the law, don't mess with us. These are our laws, these are our values, and they'll be applied equally. It doesn't matter who you're from, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your background is, what your ethnicity is. Justice is blind, and that is a fundamental principle of our country, Andrew, and it's going to be lost if this goes ahead.
We're on the same page, but isn't it interesting that individual, just take him out, hang him, bury him under the HS2?
Well, listen, I don't agree with capital punishment. I don't think it works. I don't think it's actually a deterrent necessarily, but that's perhaps an argument for another day, Andrew. But listen, thank you very much for your thoughts, Andrew in Hertfordshire there. Another Andy from Durham now. Andy, what do you make of this?
Hi. Brilliant show, by the way. Everybody at Talk Radio are fantastic. I listen majority of the days when I can, so thank you very much.
Thank you for listening.
Personally, I want to touch on a couple of issues, really, if that's okay. The whole lot is a complete sham of British values and British life. Also, as well, white, straight males are now seemingly, or it feels, we are a minority.
I don't think straight males are a minority, but they're certainly a grouping that doesn't seem to be protected in any way, whereas there are many other groupings that are.
Yeah, maybe that's what I should have read it out, so my apologies.
No, don't apologise, Andy. You're entitled to your opinion. I mean, what do you make of this two-tier justice?
Well, I think it's the left ideology. They seem to think everything is good apart from the correct things. Two-tier justice, it's absolutely lunacy. Everyone should be treated the same. If they want diversity, then diversity needs to be treated in every single way and aspect. Everyone needs to be treated the same as a human being, unless they're obviously an evil human being, of course, and then that's a different kettle of fish. Common sense and respect on the decrease, ignorance and laziness on the increase.
And it's all linked as well, Andy, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. No British morals anymore. You'll see on Facebook that the laziness and the far left, they're a drain on society, and you can see that the way they attack people for standing up in their right. And I'll give you a little example, moving away from politics to a little degree, because you can see it on social media. Say, for example, somebody will complain about kids being horrendous in the street, or immigrants
which they often are.
Yeah, most definitely. Dog mess everywhere. I've seen on numerous occasions where someone would complain about that, but the person complaining is made to feel that they are in the wrong.
Yeah.
They'll say, oh, you're just being picky, kids are just having fun and stuff like that. And there's no actual morals. When I was young and we was in the street, and if, say, like, for example, I don't know, we accidentally kicked a ball at a car or something like that, first thing we would do is go and apologise, because we didn't want someone at the bottom of the street going to our parents and say, your kids have been doing this.
But there's just no respect anymore, Andy, and there's such bad parenting, and there's so many parents who think that their kid is never wrong, and so many kids who think they're never wrong either. It's just, you know, societal values have declined even since I was a kid. Andy, thanks for your thoughts on that. Lots in that, and really interesting to hear from you. Thank you. Kenny in Edinburgh says, "Hi Cardi P, I never thought of the Labour government of being stupid or ignorant. Yes, selfish, ideological, without a doubt, but they really are stupid because the white British Christians will be dealt with in a much harsher fashion. And aren't most of the cabinet white British Christians? They are creating problems for their own kids and grandkids in years to come. So this is all for the personal benefit of the current Prime Minister and his daft mates." In fairness, Kenny, this was the Sentencing Council, which is an independent body, but I think the wider point is a fair one. Because Labour have the majority in the House, says Reg, this is the exact reason why they won't change any laws that don't suit them. Hannah says, "I'd really like to ask Nigel Farage later exactly how he will stop the boat. By which method? How will reform stop the invasion of illegals into the UK?" Well, Harry Cole will be here between 4 and 7, and you can make that point. You can lift the phone between 4 and 7, 0344 499 1000. There's a little bit of a longer message here from Gary, but I want to read it out just before I go to Ashley in London. Gary says, "You're cutting Shabna Mahmood slack that she doesn't deserve." That's the Justice Secretary. I've defended her this morning. "She has been Justice Secretary for 8 months. She should have had in place a system that ensures she is automatically notified of changes of sentencing guidelines, not just of those, but to propose changes to those guidelines so she could review them, provide the Sentencing Council with feedback, or even put the Prime Minister on notice that the changes being made to those guidelines may mean that he has to change the law because they conflict with government policy. Otherwise, you could get the ridiculous situation where the Prime Minister is standing up in front of the media telling them that he is cracking down on, say, knife crime, while the Sentencing Council is relaxing the sentencing guideline for that crime. She has dropped the ball. She needs to go," says Gary. Gary, I respectfully disagree. She wasn't told about it. She should have been. Yes, she's responsible. And in fairness to her, she's fronted it up and she said there'll never be a two-tier sentencing approach under my watch. And she said that the guidelines do not represent my views or the views of this government. So it's not something I do every single day, but I'm going to defend Shabna Mahmood. I'm going to defend the Justice Secretary on this. And she wants to get it reversed. I wish her well in that. I hope it is reversed because that's the right thing to do, because this is not fair. It is two-tier justice. She said it's a two-tier sentencing approach, and she is right, in my opinion. Ashley is in London and has given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Ashley, hello.
Hi, Peter. Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Only good thing about that is the sun, isn't it? I have to say, she should be fired. I mean, this whole sentencing board needs to be brought in front of the Justice Secretary and read the Riot Act. They need to be removed. You have to ask the question, what goes through their minds to think that this is something that is appropriate? And these are the people setting the guidelines for people for crime generally.
Yeah.
And we look at the situation that we're in. Let's be frank. This EDI, they are saying that there has to be equality, but with this there's no equality. It's like turning around saying that if I am a black Muslim man who identifies as being trans, and I shoot my partner, and I get 5 years, but if you're a white Christian man, you're going to get life.
Yeah.
Like,
it's mad. It's totally mad. It doesn't make any sense. It is totally iniquitous. It is total and absolute nonsense, Ashley.
And I just think that these sort of things, like with a lot of things that have happened, both with the Middle East, or that you've got polarising opposite opinions on things, nothing in the middle and nothing of common sense. So what you do with these things, apart from the fact that it's crazy, you are also creating a massive divide even more between communities about people. So as soon as you start prejudicing against people, so just say it's white people now, just say for instance, right, with this, all of a sudden, those people are looking at these other people and thinking, well, they can do whatever they want. I mean,
well, it's really interesting, Ashley, and the best message that I've received all day today was from someone, I think it was in the last hour, who said, can we imagine what would have happened if Baroness Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, had said, right, we need to have harsher sentences for people who are ethnic minorities? Can you imagine what the outcry would have been as a result of that? Ashley, thank you for your thoughts there. That's Ashley in London. Philip, I agree that they should be read the Riot Act, but for breaking the Riot Act, they'd probably say the sentencing should be mitigated.
Well, yes, definitely. Building on something that Harry Cole had said earlier, and looking at it, the Sentencing Council of England and Wales, an independent, non-departmental body of the Ministry of Justice. How's it non-departmental and of the Ministry of Justice? But it's set up under the Coroners and Justice Act 2009, and therefore the government does have the ability to change its terms of reference
100%.
Instantly
100%.
by just amending that act.
Yes, it does. And as Harry was saying, one-line bill. Kemi Badenoch says it can be done. And there is this sort of lawyer's approach often from Keir Starmer, who I don't think is specifically at fault here. I think the Sentencing Council themselves and Lady Carr is at fault here, who can say, oh, it's the law, oh, it's a bit difficult. You're the government, sort it out.
Well, yes, and he has to get away from his lawyer's approach to recognise that he is now setting the law as part of government, and there's a difference, and we're seeing too much time after time after time he's interpreting things from a very woke, legalistic perspective instead of going, actually, does this sit and suit the values of the British people, and is it something that we therefore need to adjust and make sure that those that were in my previous profession can interpret things in a more accurate way. This is clearly one, and he can do it. He could do it tomorrow. Absolutely, and has the majority to do it, and he has the Conservatives supporting him. So why not just do it? Why not do it today? Why not bring emergency legislation, a one-line bill, sort it out? That's what you can do, Keir Starmer. That's what Shabnam Mahmood, who I am defending today, but I do think that she could be heavily involved with this and say, you know, she's written to them to say that she doesn't want this to happen. Well, if they say no, sort it out and sort it out. And do you know when this is coming in, Philip? Do you know when this is coming in? 1st of April. Stay with us here on Talk.
Many others across the country received an email from the Ministry of Justice, Shabana Mahmood's own department, telling them that this was now the rules that they should be abiding by from the end of the month. So how she didn't know about this, God only knows, but that was the case. We got it into Parliament. Now we've got it, thanks to you and many others, into the living rooms and in the newspapers across the country. We've got to stop this. I don't want to live in a country where you are treated differently depending on whether you're a straight white man or a Hindu woman. This is totally wrong, and it has to end.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
As the show goes on, we're going to talk more about the US and Russia. Nikki has been in touch with a voice note. It's dead easy to send a voice note. You just do it through WhatsApp, 0344 499 1000. We'll play out as many of them as we can between now and 1 o'clock. This is what Nikki has to say.
America is now aligned with Russia, despite what any of your Trump apologists say. We should have been warned when J.D. Vance said the biggest enemy is Europe. So there you go. And where are we? sitting outside Europe, bobbing along, thinking that we can be a bridge or a mediator. America's lost, face it, folks.
Do you think Nicky's got a point, Philip?
Yes and no. Trump is aligning more with Russia. The beneficiary out of this is Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin plays a long game. Trump is playing a very short game, and Putin will exploit this to his own ends. And actually, I think he's setting the conditions for Putin to entrench himself more and not come to the peace table, no matter what he's doing, because Putin is thinking that he's now winning. Putin's under a lot of difficulties, and this is giving him a degree of respite that he never thought would happen, which is why we're starting to see bolder and bolder statements out of Peskov and Lavrov and everything else. And I don't think Trump's seeing it. His top team is not strong. And the thing that really gets me is that in the Zelensky attack in the Oval Office, it was J.D. Vance that led. J.D. Vance is not, or traditionally the vice president is not responsible for foreign policy and dealing with foreign leaders and all the rest of it. That is the Secretary of State. Marcus Rubio is sitting beside him silent. J.D. Vance is eating Marcus Rubio's sandwiches. Marco Rubio's sandwiches. And we're not hearing very much from him in what's going on. I think there's real problems going to be in Trump's inner circle, and they're all very, very inexperienced.
And Keith Kellogg as well, who is very experienced, obviously saying slightly different things to Pete Hegseth and various others as well.
He's been pushed out. And Trump, Peskov, Lavrov are past masters. They're exceptionally experienced. They know how to manipulate people. That's what they're very good at. And I think they're clearly manipulating the higher echelons of the US government at the moment.
Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer, with me right throughout the programme until 1 o'clock when Ian Collins is taking over in this chair. And then between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock, Harry Cole will be here, political editor of The Sun, his first drive show, and he will be interviewing none other than Nigel Farage, live in the studio, leader of Reform UK. And in The Sun today, actually, on page 10, which is the paper, of course, that Harry is political editor of, net zero is killing our once proud industry. Let's stop this lunacy, says Nigel Farage in an article there. Reform chief's plea to save jobs. And this is about various parts of the UK, places like Scunthorpe Steelworks, which is the only blast furnace left in Britain. What could happen? What could the implications for jobs be if we go on to what Nigel Farage calls an industrial massacre? Well, Ross Clark, who's the author of Not Zero, How an Irrational Target Will Impoverish You, Help China and Won't Even Save the Planet, is with us now. And Ross, you will be reacting, no doubt, to the news that Britain is one of the only countries in Europe where having a heat pump leaves households with actually higher energy bills. And this is analysis by The Telegraph, another paper, finding that it costs £80 more a year to keep a home warm with a heat pump than a gas boiler in the UK, Ross.
Yes, well, the government has this target of sort of turning us all over to heat pumps by the mid-2030s and carrying on the previous government's target of 600,000 installations a year by the end of this decade. But it's seriously hampered by the costs of these heat pumps. The cost, firstly, the cost of installing them. The average cost of an heat pump installation under the government's boiler upgrade scheme is 13,000, over 13,000. That's 4 times as much as what it will cost you for a new gas boiler. But once you've installed it, you don't make savings either, as this analysis today shows that it will cost you £80 more per year for to buy the electricity than it would have cost to buy the gas for your gas boiler. And I mean, there are a number of reasons for that. Firstly, there's the carbon levies and other climate change levies which are imposed on our electricity bills. There's also the bizarre way our electricity market works the sense that we require gas to back up these intermittent wind and solar plants. And we have this bizarre thing called marginal cost pricing, which means that, every half hour, electricity providers bid to provide us with electricity, and then everybody gets paid what the highest bidder put in. I liken it to you go to the supermarket to buy to buy, say, 12 bottles of Prosecco for your party. You get there, you find they've only got 11 bottles of Prosecco, but they've got a bottle of Veuve Clicquot champagne. So you bung that in your trolley to make up the 12. Then you go to the checkout and they charge you for 12 bottles of Veuve Clicquot. That is how our bizarre electricity market functions.
I wonder,
why we're playing through the nose.
I wonder, Ross, if you are encouraged, perturbed or interested or whatever in the fact that there seems to be some sort of cabinet reckoning in all of this. Rachel Reeves, who's got her spring statement later in the month, and Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, perhaps we're hearing anyway, splitting with Ed Miliband on all of this, saying, hold on a second, we want growth. This isn't actually going to lead to growth anytime soon, and certainly not before the next election. Maybe we should cool our boots for a bit.
Well, if that's what they are saying in internal cabinet discussions, they are absolutely right, because net zero is helping to kill off growth. It's not the only reason why we're not growing, but it is certainly imposing huge costs on industry, for example, manufacturing industry, chemicals industry, all seriously hampered by these high energy costs. But yeah, so if Rachel Reeves and Jonathan Reynolds are putting that case in cabinet, that's great. But don't assume they'll win. I mean, until this week, we were led to believe that the government might have listened to employers on the Employment Rights Bill, which is going to impose huge costs on business. But when it was sort of published with all the amendments this week, it seems that no, Angela Rayner has won everything she wanted. Rachel Reeves and Jonathan Reynolds, maybe Keir Starmer, are bit more pro-growth. They don't seem to have had their way at all, and it's the sort of unions which are being allowed to sort of dictate employment rights policy. So I wouldn't count on the government coming up with a sensible retreat on net zero.
Ross, just before you go, I want to ask you about an article you've written for The Spectator this week about why the left hates Gales. This is the upmarket bakery chain Gales, and we know that certainly that the London barrister and Fox killer Jolyon Maugham, previously of the Good Law Project, has warned his followers against shopping at Gales. Given what we know about Luke Johnson's politics, Luke Johnson is the chairman and co-owner of Gales, and he says that the full libertarian right suite, climate denialism, woke hating, anti-lockdown, Tufton Street promoting madness. Now, when this came out in December 2023, I fought a long and valiant battle to get some Gales product on expenses, which did happen, and ate them live on air, because I said there's a choice here. We can go with the person who bludgeons foxes to death, or we can go with the person who gives us nice, lovely scones and bakery products and croissants. But why does the left hate Gales? It's not just because of Luke Johnson.
No, Luke Johnson's part of the story, but no, the liberal left on the whole has this sort of snobbish distaste for trade, people in trade, and don't want them to get above their station. Do you remember the days when I was a child back in the 70s? So sort of liberal left families who refused to watch ITV because it was a grubby commercial television. They'd only watched the BBC. And there's a similar thing going on here. The sort of liberal left in Walthamstow, Bath, Bristol and places which have fought Gales. I mean, they want their sort of bakers and so on to be sort of cherry-faced wretches who sort of ride around on bikes or stand on market stalls. They don't want sort of successful businesses. They can't sort of cope with the idea that a bakery becomes successful, opens new branches over the country and makes money.
God forbid we should have any form of capitalism whatsoever. Ross, thank you. That's Ross Clark there, author of Not Zero, How an Irrational Target Will Impoverish You, Help China and Won't Even Save the Planet. Are you partial to a Gales, perhaps some sort of croissant or something like that, Philip?
Well,
they are quite pricey.
I am. They are a bit pricey. I'm known for my bacon sandwiches around the place, and Gales bacon sandwiches are not amongst the best, especially whenever you look at the price point that's there. So I will tend to avoid them.
I'm not against them though as a concept.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, and it's not allowed. ideological position. I do remember sitting with some people who identified as Liberal Democrats, must be said, who said, oh no, we love our fishmonger and we love our butcher and we love our little village and so on. But obviously, you know, for the big stuff, we just get an Amazon delivery. Just thought, well, that
sums it up
much like when I'm at Guild's having your cake and eating it. Philip Ingram is with me, former senior military intelligence officer, for the next hour as well. We're going to talk to a Ukrainian MP in a second about everything that's going on there and around Ukraine as well. From America, we've got that summit that's happening in Brussels today as well. We'll get Philip's take on that as well. He knows this back to front. We'll continue to talk about two-tier justice in this country as well. Make sure you let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell, sitting in for Julia Hartley-Brewer today. There's a lot happening, especially in regard to Ukraine. There's a summit in Brussels that Vladimir Zelensky is there. He's been welcomed by Ursula von der Leyen and other leaders. We'll talk about what's happening from the American direction, from the British direction, NATO, France. There's a lot of different players in all of this, and we've seen that summit is happening today. This is developing very, very quickly. The diplomacy is very rapid, and we have a Ukrainian MP, an opposition MP to Zelensky, in the studio. We're going to talk to her in just a second. We're also going to take your calls, texts and tweets about all sorts of other issues, including two-tier justice in this country, the absolute scandal that says that your ethnicity could mean that your sentence is reduced. That is what the Lady Chief Justice thinks should happen. We're going to talk about Starmer's Southport secrecy and a possible ban on smacking children. Let us know your thoughts on any of that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, you can do three things with the main number. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring. 0344 499 1000. Lots to discuss between now and 1 o'clock when Ian Collins will be here. And don't forget Harry Cole between 4 and 7 as well, with Nigel Farage from half an hour at 4:30. Loads today on Talk and on this programme between now and 1. Stay with us. Well, so much has been happening in regard to Ukraine today, mainly outside Ukraine, because we've seen in the last 24 hours that the US has stopped sharing all intelligence with Ukraine. They have withdrawn military support as well within the last 48 hours. Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking to reporters in Brussels, has said he's thanked European leaders at today's summit in Brussels. He says, during all this period last week, you've stayed with us. From all Ukrainians, we have a big appreciation. We are all very thankful. We are not alone. There are not just words. These are not just words. We feel it. And Ursula von der Leyen says it's a watershed moment. It's so important we stand together. She says, she's the president of the European Commission, of course, Ukraine is part of our European family. Europe faces a clear and present danger, and therefore it must be able to protect itself and defend itself. Interestingly as well, on the Russian side, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has said that Moscow would regard European peacekeepers deployed to Ukraine as the official involvement of NATO forces in the war against Russia. Is that a negotiating position, or is that something we really seriously need to worry about? Several European leaders, of course, have floated this idea on previous occasions of sending a European peacekeeping contingent to Ukraine after the two sides achieve some sort of ceasefire, whether that's temporary or a longer thing. Well, Kira Rudik is with us now. She is a Ukrainian MP. She's the leader of the political party Holos, which translates as voice. They're in opposition to Zelensky, but I'm sure there's a lot of common ground on the international side of things. Kira, thank you for joining me in the studio here today. I should say that Philip Ingram is with me as well. He's a former senior military intelligence officer, and I'd like Philip just to chip in and let us know your thoughts on all of this, because this really is his area of expertise as well. Kira, first of all, what is your reaction to what the Russians have said in regard to saying that European peacekeepers deployed to Ukraine as the official involvement of NATO forces? That is a very strong statement to make. What do you make of it?
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. It's so good to be here. Well, Russia didn't change its position. They inside the country, they are saying that they are fighting with NATO already, and they obviously want to receive Ukraine that will be helpless. I don't even know this word that they are using, denazified and then demilitarized. They want to have us weak so they can counter us.
Is it denazified?
Yeah, something. Yeah,
they would allege that there are Nazi overtones to certain aspects of Ukrainian society, to take that out of society. Yeah.
This is what their goals that they had claimed since 2022. So they are just going towards this goal, and they of course want us weak because their general goal is to conquer Ukraine and for us to stop being a sovereign, independent country. However, we need to look right now at what's happening from a general perspective. We see that what J.D. Vance has said at the Munich Security Conference, that Europe has to take responsibility for its own security, that it is coming together through the European leaders who are starting thinking about, okay, like what would really happen if the US will take off their umbrella. And we all need to work together in defining a clear and comprehensive plan on how Europe can work on its security, can become stronger and able to defend itself against Russia and any other threats.
Let's just talk about that defending itself, because it's interesting. Obviously, Russia has control of about 1/5 of Ukrainian territory. Apart from the feint that was sent, apart from the attempt to take Kyiv a few months ago, has there been any serious attempt, do you think, for Russia to take over all of Ukraine? Because we hear this a lot. We hear that Russia's aim is to take over all of Ukraine. We hear that mainland Europe is at risk from Russia as well. How realistic is that?
Well, as a proof that it is realistic, that Russia has included 4 of our regions into their constitution. They do not control the majority of the regions, but they already said that it's theirs. So right now, if for some reason President Trump is putting to the table of negotiation, Putin will have to go against his constitution, accepting that they don't control these territories. So Russia was making it clear a couple of times that for them, Ukraine is a made-up country, and that Ukraine's nation does not exist, that we're just like a part of Russians who do not behave well. And for us, it's very clear from what the documents and other different statements that we have received that it's Russia's plan to reunite Soviet Union, restore it, and possibly Russian Empire. They never declined it.
But they haven't been able to do that over 3 years.
Because of Ukraine's armed forces and because of you guys who were standing with us.
And a major part of that, of course, are American forces as well. How do you assess what has happened in the last week in regard to America withdrawing its support?
Peter, I do not agree saying that America is a major supporter, because Europe has been
They've given you more military aid than any other country.
But they have been only ones of those who were giving us military aid, because Europe was supporting us very well as well. It will be very hard for us to go on without American intelligence and without their air defense. That is true. But it will not be like such a ending catastrophe. And we will try to hold on and push forward.
I mean, it's a very significant part of your. I mean, is it possible for Ukraine to continue to fight a war without America?
In 2022, the first days we didn't have anyone by our side, and we still decided not to capitulate, though it was much harder. Right now, we are in a better position. We have our allies, including Britain, by our side. We have European countries stepping up. And again, like thinking about the global picture of the security, and we have Ukraine. We have ourselves as we always had, and we are ready to fight because we have seen what is happening at the occupied territories. We have seen what happened when we pushed Russia back, what they were leaving there, and I can tell you 3 things: mass graves, torture rooms, and victims of the sexual assault. And we know that it is coming for us if we fail defending us ourselves.
And of course, more Ukrainian children being stolen and taken to Russia. What seems to me, from my perspective at the moment, is there's very much a personal attack on President Zelensky and his leadership in Ukraine. Do you think, and I know the Ukrainian constitution doesn't allow this to happen at the moment, but do you think that Zelensky has got to a position where he has to move to one side and let someone else come in, and that may start to resolve some of the political difficulties that we're seeing with the new Trump regime?
Again, our constitution does not allow us to conduct any elections, and even if we wanted to do that, it will be incredibly hard to do it, first and foremost because we have so many military people who need to be able to participate in the elections, either to vote or to run, right?
But do you feel Zelensky personally? It was very striking, I found, on Friday when what happened in the Oval Office happened, and there were many European leaders who said, we support Ukraine, we support Ukraine, we support Ukraine. Fair enough. The word Zelensky wasn't used very often. I wonder, is he an obstacle now?
Even as an opposition party leader, I do not think that we can have any other president right now. First, because of his, of anybody else's legitimacy. Because it will be obviously contested. Second, how would we elect him? Russia has interfered with the elections of the countries that were not at war, right? We have seen it, even the United States. So the risks that if for some reason, somehow, technically, we would be able to conduct some elections, the risk that Russia will influence it is huge. And again, why should we? Ukraine is very good in telling our presidents if they're not performing well. We had revolutions, right? So it's up to Ukrainian people to tell our president if he's not working well for Ukrainian people. Right now, it's presidents of the other countries, Russia and United States, who say we don't like him. Well, okay, but democracies, Ukrainian people like him. And we will continue working with him. I think he is doing a very good job as a president of the wartime. And he has our support right now within the country. That's truth.
We know overnight that his own hometown, help me with the pronunciation here.
Kryvyi Rih.
Kryvyi Rih was, you struggled with an English word earlier. I'm struggling with the Ukrainian word now. Yes, right. Yeah. We're helping one another out. Yeah. It was struck very sadly by Russian missiles, and according to local authorities, 4 people were killed, 31 people injured in the strike. I mean, from Russia's perspective, if you do want peace, if you do want to negotiate, this kind of action is not what you do. I wonder how you assess any real desire for peace from Russia. Do you think you should negotiate with them?
We have heard from Donald Trump many times that he thinks that Putin wants peace. On the ground, we have not seen a single one fact that would support that. So attacks on the battlefield continue, attacks on the peaceful cities continue. I was in Kiev like 4 days ago, and the situation was terrifying. I don't remember honestly the last time when I had to sleep at home without having to go to the bomb shelter, like the middle of the night. So no fact proving that Russia wants peace.
We hear a lot about the politics and we see what's going on at the moment, but actually critical to all of this, and the politicians represent the people. What's the feeling amongst the Ukrainian people at the moment, having seen everything that's going on over the last week that has been incredible? It would have been rejected as a script for a novel or for a television play because it was so incredible. How do the Ukrainian people feel?
Well, people are exhausted because of the war. That is true. But people were really offended when foreign politicians were telling our president how he should behave, what he should wear. We don't like this. And people were really coming together in the support. I think we still have it in ourselves to fight. Mm-hmm. That is the truth. And I want to assure you that every piece of help that is coming from the United Kingdom, from Europe, is being used for the best, for our common future, for our European future, and for the defense of Europe. Our fighters at the front line are especially efficient and effective with the limited resources that they have, and people who are not fighting are dedicating lots of their resources to push the aggressor away. And this is how we plan to go on, with high hopes that Europe will stand up as a united force.
What do you think will happen with the negotiations with Russia and between Russia and America? How do you think, what do you expect will happen?
So I think the minerals deal between Ukraine and the United States will be signed eventually because Donald Trump needs it as a gesture to show his voters that he is delivering on the promise. And we actually support this deal to be signed. Then I think at some point President Trump will have to deliver something from Russia, and that will be incredibly hard to do because, again, for them it's so easy for Russia to bring peace. They just have to stop fighting. Yeah. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. If Russia stops fighting, there is no war. Yeah. Simple as that.
Kira, thanks very much for coming into the studio. That's Kira Rudik there, who is a Ukrainian MP, she's leader of the political party Holos, which means voice. And thanks to Philip for his thoughts. It's really his area of expertise. So great to have a few questions from him as well. And if you have questions for Philip or for me, or you want to make a point about this, you want to make your get your point across, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll take some of your calls, texts and tweets next. And we're also going to talk about this two-tier justice scandal that is happening. I know there are a few people who want to get in on that. Also, Starmer's Southport secrecy. This could have put the trial at risk. The terror watchdog saying withholding information from the public could be far more prejudicial than revealing the fact. Well, why didn't they just reveal the facts in the first place? And doctors say that we should ban smacking because there's no benefit for children. Were you smacked as a kid? What do you think of it now? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
These sentencing guidelines were signed off in a meeting with all the bigwigs from the legal system, including her own representative, one of the most senior civil servants at the Ministry of Justice. So either she knew about this and it is her policy, but now she's having to change tack because people are so furious. Either way, it's a terrible reflection. Look, I think there is creeping two-tier justice in this country. It's two-tier justice. We have to stop this now. The Sentencing Council have to scrap these guidelines. If they won't, we should be changing the law and ending their independence so that we don't have this situation going on forever.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you to Sue in Canterbury, who has been in touch about the issue of Ukraine and its war. Sue, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Well, this really is a question for Philip Ingram.
Well, he's here. He's ready and willing.
I want to make it clear before I start that I'm not a supporter of Russia.
Okay.
But Europe supports Ukraine. That's been made quite obvious. In France, President Macron said that Europe is at war with Russia. So they're not neutral. Why on earth do you expect Russia to accept a European peacekeeping force? Surely that would be madness for Russia.
Well, from Russia's perspective, it is, because Russia's tried to justify its re-invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago on the expansionism of NATO. It all comes down to the interpretation of why people are there, and Russia refuses to accept that understanding. However, if you look at Russia's history, let's go back to Kosovo. Russia came and was part of a NATO-led force in Kosovo bringing peace in. So they're very good at interpreting what they want to do for their own political outcome, and they, I think that sticking to the position that they're in at the moment is putting that proverbial knife in the fractures that there are out there between the international community and wiggling it. And they're doing this deliberately out of badness.
What do you think of that, Sue?
That was not my question. My question was, if Europe supports Ukraine, if Macron feels that they're at war with Russia, why does anyone expect Russia to accept them as a peacekeeping force?
Well, I don't think Macron actually, and I need to go back and read the detail of his speech, actually saw himself at war. He did not declare war on Russia as part of his speech.
No, he didn't declare war.
He made a lot of implied comments, but he is a past master at international diplomacy and would know what a declaration of war would be to Russia. And we would be talking about completely different things today if he had actually done that. Russia won't accept, and they've been consistent the whole way through that they won't accept. But there has to be some form of peacekeeping force on the ground somewhere, and that peacekeeping force has to be generated. Now, it would be interesting if China turns around and says that it would provide it. I think the Ukrainian people would find that unacceptable because of China's tacit support for Russia. And therefore, as we're seeing with a lot of the European countries saying that they're not going to participate, including the Poles, who've got one of the strongest militaries in Europe, the Italians have said they're not going to participate on the ground. It's going to be very difficult to generate a force to do that. But taking one step back, we're a long way off there being a peace agreement, never mind understanding what troops would be needed to go on the ground, never mind working out where those troops should come from. So we're almost in a bit of a theoretical argument at the moment.
What do you think, Sue?
I totally understand that. The last part of what you said, I totally agree.
Okay, so
my point was only, why would you expect them to accept a European peacekeeping force? And you've sat there today and criticised Russia for that. We wouldn't accept a Belarusian peacekeeping force in Ukraine, would we?
No,
because they support the Russians.
Yeah, no, you're right. We wouldn't, and it's the perception from the different countries, and this has to be part of as we go down the negotiating table. And I've been in positions where we've negotiated peacekeeping and peace enforcement forces going into different operational theatres, and you start diametrically opposed, and as you sit down around the table, you start to bring in something that is agreeable to both sides. This is all part of the negotiating process, and at the moment, the Russians will say something that will polarise them. The Americans will say something else. Europe will say something else. And we need something that starts to bring that together. That's why I say we're a long, long way off. And this is something that will evolve over time. It's not something that is going to be mandated on people.
Sue, thanks for your call there. That's Sue in Canterbury there. Number of people getting in touch on sentencing. This is all about critical legal theory. Why are people surprised Labour want to bring this in? On Twitter, Graham says, you're talking nonsense, Peter, about Shabnam Mahmood, the Justice Secretary. It is her responsibility to be fully aware of such a dramatic change within the Ministry of Justice. She actually had a member of her own team at the committee when the decision was made. She must have known. She didn't. And even Robert Jenrick knew about that. And in fact, if we go back to that clip of what Robert Jenrick was doing earlier on, the second clip from Robert Jenrick on being treated differently, and he was emailed, actually a magistrate, a Justice of the Peace, let him know about this, and it was yesterday. He totally blindsided the Justice Secretary, Shabnam Mahmood. She didn't know what was going on, and she has in fairness reacted to it. Let's just remind ourselves about what Robert Jenrick said earlier this morning to Mike Graham.
I was emailed by a magistrate who, like many others across the country, received an email from the Ministry of Justice, Shabnam Mahmood's own department, telling them that this was now the rules that they should be abiding by from the end of the month. So how she didn't know about this, God only knows, but that was the case. We got it into Parliament. Now we've got it, thanks to you and many others, into the living rooms and in the newspapers across the country. We've got to stop this. I don't want to live in a country where you are treated differently depending on whether you're a straight white man or a Hindu woman. This is totally wrong, and it has to end.
Stephen's been in touch and said Shabnam Mahmood's representatives were at the meeting. Did they object? Well, we don't know. And certainly this went through, and there are 14 people on the committee, on the Sentencing Council. Joe says the government needs to disband this body or change its terms of reference to stop interference. Who monitors? Who are they accountable to? Their decision making is laden with personal values. It is politicised, in Joe's opinion. And Luke says, I wouldn't normally say this, but as someone with poor mental health, I'm absolutely terrified about this new sentencing guidance. It feeds directly into previous trauma. There's sleepless nights ahead. Luke, I'm very sorry to hear that is the case. Please get and accept help if you need it for that. And there are stories that do upset people, and we don't aim to do that. We aim to just tell you the news and discuss it and have a reasonable discussion about it. Dave's been in touch from Bristol. He says, I support the efforts for a lasting peace in Ukraine. However, it seems currently that the compromise is one way from Ukraine and the pressure is one way to Ukraine. What is Russia prepared to compromise on, if anything? What is their contribution to a lasting peace? Thomas says JFK, Khrushchev used to exchange letters between each other secretly, which helped prevent nuclear war back in the 60s. People maybe gave Trump the benefit of the doubt before they accused him of aligning with Russia. Thomas says, looks like we're heading for a world war. Stuart says, I fear the Russian attacks in Ukraine will intensify now they're being less supported by America. And before Europe can build up the strength to replace them, Putin will take advantage of this weakness. And Betty says, the wooden spoon, talking about smacking, which we're talking about in a second or two, the wooden spoon still puts the fear of God into me and would a lot less. She's used a word, I'm not sure I can use this word on air, but I'm going to go anyway with it, see what happens, see if Compliance Claire wraps me over the knuckles. She talks about scroots in hoodies stealing, and kids at home and benefits would be very different if it was back in full use, says Betty. So we'll find out after the programme whether I'm allowed to say scroots on air or not. Graham is in Kent. You're very welcome to the programme. Graham, what would you like to say?
I want to invest in Peter's knowledge, vast knowledge of the world affairs. I just want to say that I think there's a big hurry by the Trump administration to sort out Ukraine because of what China's doing. I heard an expert the other day talking about 2027 they expect China to attack Taiwan, and Chinese are doing all sorts of manoeuvres in the South China Seas now with their shipping. Do you think, Peter, that that's what's on Trump's mind, that we can't be attacked from both Russia and China?
I honestly don't know. Let's ask Philip Ingram. What do you think?
Oh, 100%. That's on Trump's mind. There are three major conflicts around the world at the moment. We've got in Europe, Russia, Ukraine. We've got the Middle East, and there's no sign of an early peace coming there. And we've got a growing situation in Southeast Asia. America's back door is seen as Southeast Asia, and a lot of what Trump is saying is focused on China. So that's his biggest area of worry. And effectively, what he's doing and bullying the EU into stepping up is saying, look, you can't expect America to be the world police policeman for all three major conflicts that have got a direct impact on the EU as a business entity and elsewhere. You need to take on the one that's in your backyard and take responsibility for that. We will deal with the others with your help as well, but you need to step up, and actually he's forcing Europe to step up, and that is definitely one of his tactics, one of his concerns.
What do you think, Graham?
Oh, I think I'm very grateful for Peter to highlight it. I don't think it's been highlighted. Trump is sort of they're pushing in on Trump on Ukraine, but there are other considerations, and I do see that we have a major problem, and if China attacks Taiwan, then that could instigate another world war, in my opinion. So I think that's really fundamental issue.
Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. But Graham, thank you. That's Graham in Kent there. We're going to talk again about a law and order issue. Danny Shaw will be with us in a second. He's a police and crime and justice commentator. He's also a former advisor to Yvette Cooper. And this is a really interesting one. It's from the Reviewer of Terrorism in regard to Keir Starmer and what should have been put in the public domain in regard to Southport. And the terror watchdog says withholding the information from the public could actually have been far more prejudicial than just revealing the facts, just telling us the truth about Axel Ridder-Kubana. We will make sure we discuss this in depth and get your views on it too in just a few minutes here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Jonathan Hall is King's Counsel, a senior barrister, and he's criticised Keir Starmer and the authorities for refusing to reveal details about the Southport attacks, which were, of course, carried out by Axel Ridder-Kubana, and the failure to disclose basic facts about Axel Ridder-Kubana led to dangerous fictions that could have prejudiced his murder trial. This is an article in the Daily Telegraph. The independent reviewer of terrorism said withholding the information could have been far more prejudicial than just being honest, making the facts public. Let me just read you a couple of paragraphs here. The failure by the authorities to spell out basic and sober facts about the attacker led to contagious disinformation about a murderous Muslim asylum seeker that stoked the ensuing riots. I would go further than that. It led to dangerous fictions that could have been far more prejudicial to the prosecution of Ridder-Kubana than some of the true facts which were suppressed in the name of contempt of court. Had there been a trial, jurors could have entered court with the impression that Ridder-Kubana was a Muslim asylum seeker and, more toxically, that the authorities were determined to hush it up. Mr. Hall then said it would be far better for the authorities to provide an accurate lead than ineffectual near silence. The Prime Minister, let's remember, as he often tells us, was the chief prosecutor in this country, was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. Well, Danny Shaw is a police and crime and justice commentator. He's also a former advisor to Yvette Cooper. Danny, what do you make of this?
Hi, Peter. Look, I really respect Jonathan Hall, and I think he's making a good point. I think that this is more about a combination of caution and inexperience. What you had here, going back to last July, was a director of public prosecutions who was reasonably new in post, only been in post, I think, 7 or 8 months. So he's the person that leads the Crown Prosecution Service. And I think most of sort of the guidance from this was coming from the CPS. At the same time,
but he's not an amateur, Danny. He's not someone who's wet behind the ears. He's someone who has been a leading prosecutor and has been, he's head of the CPS. It's his job to get it right.
Yeah, he's not an amateur. And I think also you had a fairly new government. Probably not, those ministers have not been in a situation like this before, where you've got an attack on this scale and you've got to react and you've got to decide about the information you release and whose advice do you take and whose advice you don't take. So I think you have that combination. The police did want to release more information. We know that because Serena Kennedy, the chief constable, told a Commons committee a couple of weeks ago that in effect she felt she was blocked from saying that Ruta Cabana was from a Christian background rather than being Muslim, which was the information, the disinformation, the misinformation that was going around at the time, because the CPS locally objected to that and said you can't put that information out there. It could derail the trial process, prejudice a trial, and so on. And she, quite clearly, reluctantly accepted that advice. Now, that advice was from a local Crown Prosecution Service official. It then appeared to be contradicted by people at CPS headquarters in London, but by then it was too late. But, I think all of this comes from the top. And I do think that if you've got, a DPP that's sort of sending out sort of signals of being sort of fairly cautious and playing it by the book, then that sort of permeates through the rest of the organisation.
But actually, ironically, had they just been straight and fair and straightforward, perhaps, there is the strong implication, I don't want to put words in Jonathan Hall's mouth here, but there's a strong implication that the riots could have been avoided here.
Yeah, well, we're never going to know that, are we, Peter?
Yeah, you can't prove the counterfactual, but
yeah.
Isn't it a lesson, would be my point, a lesson that just, if you're straight with the public, if you tell them the facts, if you don't try to hide things for them. The worry here was misinformation. The worry was people getting it wrong. But essentially what happened was that led to misinformation. That's what happened.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the information vacuum. And that's really dangerous in any major police investigation or criminal inquiry. If you have this vacuum, then it gets filled with misinformation and disinformation, rumours, gossip, innuendo, all the rest of it. That's why it's so important for the police to put some information out there. And it seemed to me that purely factual information about the name of the individual, he was on the cusp of 18 and a court finally decided that they could release his name, his age, his background, where he's from, and his religion, because that clearly was an issue. Mm-hmm. That is factual information. It's not going to be in dispute. It's not going to be an issue at any trial. I think there is a question about the discoveries at his address of the ricin material and weapons and so on. I personally think that's more questionable whether you could release that information. It's very easy to say with hindsight, well, he pleaded guilty, so it wouldn't have mattered. But people didn't know that at the time, and they didn't know what offences he was going to be charged with. And so I think that is more difficult area. But on that factual information, the police really should have just sort of bulldozed through the CPS advice and said, no, we've got to do this to stop the disinformation out there. The message is to police and prosecutors, you've got to step up and release more information and be a bit bolder about doing it. And
just be honest. And I think a lot of our viewers and listeners, we covered this story in regard to Southport, obviously, at the time and subsequently in great depth. And I think a number of our viewers and listeners really feel taken for fools and treated badly by the authorities, not just in regard to this, but also the big story that's in a lot of the papers today, the Times, front page of the Mail as well, that there is straightforwardly, in the sense that the Justice Secretary has called it two-tier sentencing, and Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, has called it two-tier sentencing, the fact that there is a sentencing council headed by the Lady Chief Justice, again, not an amateur, 14 people, including Stephen Parkinson, the person we're talking about who's head of the Crown Prosecution Service, saying that there should be some form of mitigation or at least consideration of people's ethnicity or whether they're neurodivergent or transgender in the sentencing. That, to me, is completely unfair. I wonder what you think, Danny.
So to be clear, these are guidelines not about the sentence, but about whether a pre-sentence report should be ordered from the probation service. So, you know, when someone is sentenced, it's quite usual for probation officers to draw up a report assessing the background and character of the individual, the risks they pose, to help the judge or the magistrate decide whether that person should go to prison, whether they should be given a community sentence. But it does influence
the sentencing. That it is a pre-sentencing report, as you said. It can influence the sentencing. Yeah, that's the point of it.
Yeah, it can affect the sentencing. The idea is to give a more appropriate sentence. Now, a consultation was carried out, Peter. You talk about the Sentencing Council. This was a very wide consultation. It started in 2022, this piece of work. The consultation ran for 3 months from November 23 to February 24. 150 people and groups responded to that consultation. Robert Jenrick wasn't one of those who responded.
But you know and I know, Danny, sorry to interrupt you, Danny, but you know and I know that most government consultations aren't worth the paper they're printed on.
It's not a government consultation, it's an independent consultation.
Okay, apologies, an independent.
And to be fair, Peter, and I've looked at this in some detail, they took those responses into account, in a meaningful way. But so you can't say it's a ridiculous consultation. It was a genuine consultation, and a lot of people responded.
It came to a ridiculous
and
conclusion.
They made a point of noting the Magistrates Association objected to the list of groups who would be likely to get a pre-sentence report, which includes ethnic, cultural or faith minority communities. So those objections were listed, but they were essentially ignored. And in fact, the Sentencing Council beefed up its guideline, because previously it said a pre-sentence report should be particularly important if an offender was from those groups. The new guideline says it would normally be considered necessary if someone's from one of those groups. Now, I think there is disparity in the criminal justice system, and it's incontrovertible that black and minority ethnic people are more likely to go to prison, more likely to be stopped and searched, etc., etc.
And to be victims of crime.
There is no evidence that I've seen that says a pre-sentence report is more likely to address those disparities and inequalities. And that's where I think the Sentencing Council has fallen down, because actually it can't evidence the change that it's made. And in fact, it says ethnicity data relating to offenders is often incomplete. Drawing conclusions is almost impossible. And yet it's gone ahead and put this guideline in. So I think if there's an argument to make, the argument is the Sentencing Council has actually acted against the evidence.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting perspective on it, and good to get more detail on that. Why do you think they've done that? Because you talk about the consultation. They appear to have taken the consultation, ignored it, beefed things up, as you say, and gone against it. So, and also, I suppose my second question is how Shabnam Mahmood was caught on the hop with this.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Magistrates Association were obviously very much against this idea, and I'm sure some other people were as well, but there were clearly people who were in favour and who gave a positive response. I think what they're concerned about is addressing disparities in the criminal justice system, and I'd absolutely be, at one with them on that. But I think somehow they've fallen into this trap of thinking that they can somehow do it by creating a list of people who are going to get something that other people aren't going to get. And I just think, I don't know, I think they've got carried away, and I think it's a bit of a mess, quite frankly. I think the intention was probably good, but I think the way they've done it is really poor. That's not how you're going to address, I don't think, disparities.
What do you think of this general... sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, your other question about
Yeah.
Shabana Mahmood. I just think it's one of those things, Peter, that's kind of quite a small report, and it comes out every so often. A lot of the detail of it is, people don't really pay much attention to, and it's been drawn attention to Robert Jenrick, and frankly, he's Shabana Mahmood was a bit caught unawares by it, quite clearly.
I think I would add to that having been a special advisor in the Ministry of Justice, what often happens is that, and in other government departments as well, there are 10 things every day that can cause a major problem, and 9 out of 10 of them won't cause a problem. They'll just go away, and you'll never hear another word about them, and maybe the Secretary of State wasn't made aware of it. I should say, I've been defending her all morning, actually, in regard to her response to this, and other people have been saying I shouldn't do that. I just wonder more broadly, we've got Sue Carr, Baroness Carr, who is the Lady Chief Justice, and this is now essentially the second time that she has very publicly contradicted political figures. You may say it's a slightly different set of circumstances, but previously she said that Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch shouldn't have commented. It was inappropriate and worrying that they were commenting on the views of a judge. This is in regard to rules for Ukrainian families that were then applied, as you're aware, to a Gazan family. I don't think it's her role to say that. I don't think it threatens her independence necessarily for politicians to say, we believe in the rule of law, but also we think this decision is wrong. I wonder what your thoughts, as someone who's followed these issues for a long time, Danny, I just wonder what your thought is on that.
So I think what she was really concerned with was that she felt that the two politicians, that Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch, had misinterpreted that particular case. And had then sort of played politics with it. And if that was her concern, then I think she's right to express that concern. And I think there was some misrepresentation of that particular case and the way it was presented. But then she went on to say, if government ministers want to challenge, then they've got an appeal that they can make it through the courts. And there was a suggestion, really, in what she was saying was, just shut up, accept the court rulings and judgments. If you don't like them, then you've got a route through the courts to appeal against them. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that element of it. I think politicians have absolutely got a right to say, well, that's the judgment. I disagree with it for these reasons. I don't like it, and we'll seek to either amend it through the courts, or we'll introduce legislation to overturn it. They're absolutely right to give a view on a judgment, as long as they don't get personal and criticise particular judges.
Well, I think it's fine to criticise individual judges. I think it's fine to criticise Baroness Carr, and I think that it is actually quite worrying that we have a Lady Chief Justice who doesn't seem to believe that politicians or anybody can have free speech and can criticise what judges do and say, as if judges are somehow infallible. They're absolutely not. I just find it, maybe I'm exaggerating here, maybe you disagree with what I'm saying, Danny, but it does worry me that we have a Lady Chief Justice who has made these, now a couple of times, done these things that are just, I would say, beyond the remit of what she should be doing.
I didn't like her comments about that. I thought that she was going. I agree with you. I think she was going too far. I think she was just angry about the way that particular case had been misinterpreted. I think.
Okay.
But I didn't like the fact that she sort of was basically hinting, that politicians should sort of keep their trap shut.
Yeah.
No, they don't have to do that. When I mean personal, what I mean is personal attacks on judges. I mean, it's fair to criticise, if a judge has made a speech or something like that. I think it's fair to criticise them, but I think you have to be careful not to make it personal, because they are doing a job. That's not to say you shouldn't name them, but I think there's a line to be drawn, and we have seen in the past some particular individual judges who've been subject to really unwarranted criticism.
Well, and I part of the world I come from, Danny, know all about that in terms of judges being targeted, and still to this day having to have 24-hour police protection. So certainly I want judges to act fairly, impartially, in the way that they should. Totally agree with you on that final final point there. Danny Shaw, thank you. Danny Shaw is a police and crime and justice commentator, former advisor to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper as well. Liam says the irony of Southport is the very information we were not told, as it wasn't relevant, is the very information that is relevant with this new sentencing guidance, i.e. race, religion, ethnicity, etc. Emma in York says, if many are worried re China potentially invading Taiwan in the next coming years, why would the UK be paying to give away the very important Chagos Islands that are an integral position for such a conflict and giving China a global hub in London? Again, for me, China is a way bigger issue and concern than Russia, way bigger, and the UK and West need to wake up to that fact. Final thought here from Robert. Please name one good thing President Trump has done since becoming president again. Robert, let me just find this exact tweet that he has sent, and I will tell you exactly one good thing that he has done. I'll do that in a second. I think the man is and always has been a disgrace, says Rob. He's a businessman at heart, and all his decisions are led by how he can deliver a profit to loyal Americans, not how to build peace in the world. I am going to find you. Philip is going to talk for a second about what he thinks about those messages, and I'm going to find you a good thing that Trump did, because it's in my... Oh, I found it. This was a message he sent on Truth Social, a warning to Hamas terrorists. He said, Shalom Hamas means hello and goodbye. You can choose. Release all of the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it is over, in capital letters, for you. Only sick and twisted people keep bodies, and you're sick and twisted. His views on this, his actions against Hamas terrorists, his ideas, I disagree with him on the Gaza Riviera, but actually moving things forward in terms of the Middle East and saying that those hostages have to come back, that is a very good thing that Donald Trump has done, and President Biden did very little indeed. Philip.
Yeah, I agree completely, and that is the one good thing, provided he follows up on it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change. So he needs to live up to that threat to Hamas, and we need to eradicate Hamas completely. But some of the other comments are exactly right. Giving up the Chagos Islands will allow China to exploit a strategically vital part of an area of the world that I think is the longer term area of conflict. It's going from potential conflict to, I would now say, there will be conflict in Southeast Asia in coming years if we don't sit up and deal with it very quickly indeed.
We're going to talk about whether we should ban smacking in just a minute. Stay with us here on Talk.
They could allocate the necessary resources. I mean, look how many umpteen billions are being thrown at net zero. If a fraction of that budget were used to control our borders and have proper systems and proper staff to stop this endless flow of the wrong people being here and never being sent home or being able to just creep back in again, then this country, our country, would be in a much better place.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Should we ban smacking of children? Well, they did in Ireland, and various parts of the world, smacking of children is banned. Top doctors have now pleaded with the government to implement a ban as it offers no benefit, they say, and puts children at risk of really significant physical harm. Under the Children Act 2004, it declared it unlawful to hit your child except where reasonable punishment, which is judged on a case-by-case basis. Let's talk to Joe Hemmings, who's a psychologist. Top doctors saying it has no benefit to children. I wonder, Joe, what you think of this.
Hi, Peter. Good to talk to you. I'm sorry that I'm swathed in the sunlight, but I can't block it out.
That's all right. The sun's probably a bit big for you to block out by yourself.
I've given it my best shot. Look, we know that it was banned in Scotland in 2020. It was banned in Wales in 2022. And we know that it's had a positive impact on child protection. We also know that smacking doesn't do anything for children's well-being. It's detrimental and it serves no purpose. And a recent survey done by the NSPCC said 71% of people would like to see this ban introduced in England. And I think the problem is that smacking, very catch-all word. At one end, it's a pat. At the other end, it's a slap or it's a beating. At what point is a smack a smack? Yeah. And I think
because when I hear smacking, I think of being smacked as a child, like on the back of the legs or something, which was read for about 3 minutes, and then I got on with my life and stopped crying. Whereas there are people who talk about child abuse and serious campaigns of torture against children, which is just, this wasn't even 1% of that, and I'm slightly of the generation, even at 40 years old, of people who say, well, it didn't do me any harm, but actually maybe it does. Maybe it's something that, I couldn't imagine hitting a child. I'm not a parent, but I couldn't imagine hitting a child.
I've got 2 boys. I didn't smack them. Partly because I didn't want them to think that a bigger person like me could smack a little person like them. They could go into school and they could smack younger children. It does have that sort of ripple effect. And the fact that we know that we have evidence, scientific evidence, that it does work, if it makes one parent think twice about hitting, smacking, slapping their child, then the ban will do some good. So I'm all for it. It's been backwards and forwards to Parliament for years and years. We've seen the evidence in Scotland. We've seen the evidence in Wales. I really don't understand why it's being, raised again and nothing has been done about it.
What would you say to parents who say, actually, I'll decide how I bring up my child, not you?
Well, I'd say, it's about the parent. It's the parent's response. It's their temper. That's what bothers me. Of course, you've got to bring up your child in your own way. But I think parents who have slapped their children probably deeply regret it the minute they've done it. The child has done something naughty. It's better to be age appropriate with them. Talk to them about it. Put them on the naughty step. Ground them. Take away privileges. But don't let your temper get the better of you and smack your child as a result of something you've been irritated about because you're stressed.
Joe, thank you. That's Joe Hemmings, who's a psychologist. Philip, were you smacked as a child?
I was, at home and in school, and I'm of that age where I'll say it didn't do me any harm. And I think there's a balance here. People who go too far and beat their children, and it's not just a smack, then that is too far and need to be dealt with under the law. But also, if you don't have a deterrent, if you're putting the child on the naughty step, if you're removing privileges from them, if you're doing other things, that could get into psychological torture and could go too far itself and cause a different type of harm to the child. Getting that balance is really, really difficult.
Thank you, Philip Ingram, who's been with me all day. Philip Ingram, MPE, who's a former senior military intelligence officer. All show, I should say. Sorry, horrible Freudian slip there. It's always great to have Philip's company. I should say the UK government has signed a deal with an Anglo-American defence company to provide Ukraine's armed forces with more advanced attack drones to tackle Russian aggression in the Black Sea. That's according to the Ministry of Defence. I'm sure there'll be more on that in Ian Collins' show. A man who's never on the naughty step.
Never on the naughty step.
But does deserve a smack.
once in a while, yes.
What's coming up in
Well,
your
they say
programme?
that as an adult it makes you irrational and angry, and that's not true.
How dare they? How dare they
What's
say
wrong
that?
with you, Cardwell? But yeah, sorry, I can't get out my head that the guests of the show are with you all day. I like that. I like the idea.
We will part ways. Much as I enjoy Philip's company, we will
bring your guests. Bring your guests to work day. So you start off. You have breakfast together.
Yeah.
You're going to be dining later. You and Philip. It's going to be lovely. And on that logic, Isabel Oakeshott and I will be dining later as well.
Will you?
She's on the programme. Talking about that issue of the two-tier thing, because a lot of that two-tier stuff that's talked about, it's a bit of mischief on our part with two-tier this, two-tier that, and people have argued it forever. But here's a story where you think, actually, there's no way out of this.
Black and white.
This is actually
Black
happening.
and white.
There's no opinion here. This is sentencing guidelines.